Today I'm speaking with Steve Hilliker. Steve, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tim.
And did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Hilliker, yep.
Hilliker, okay, great.
Yeah, you got it.
And for anyone who doesn't know Steve, Steve is the creator and the host of a podcast called Voices of Deconversion, which we're going to talk about more in a little bit. Each episode, Steve interviews an atheist or an agnostic about their deconversion from Christianity. So very similar to a lot of what we're doing here. For the past year, he's been enjoying working as an online English tutor for people learning English as a foreign language. Currently, Steve is also applying to graduate programs with the goal of eventually becoming a high school history teacher. That's really cool. Steve lives near Seattle with his wife and 2 teenage sons. He likes passing the time watching TV series, sports, listening to podcasts, and looking forward to the day when we can all safely travel again. So ditto to that one.
Yeah.
Besides what I do know about you, and I know a little bit more about you from listening to your podcast, but could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and bring us up to speed about what Steve Hilliker is all about?
Yeah. So I mean that's a good kind of introduction to kind of the recent kind of history for me, or my recent history. But yeah, it was after. I mean, we'll jump into the deconversion stuff, but like after I deconverted in around like 2005, it kind of threw off all of my career plans. So from that point until like last year, I was in a career or in a line of work that like I didn't enjoy at all. I got into it kind of just because it paid well at the time. I needed to get a job and it was like a customer service job. And so I stayed with that company for like 8 years and then moved on to another company. And just the whole time just wanted out, like wanted to do something different. And I'd thought about teaching right when I graduated with my biblical studies degree. I thought about like, okay, teaching might be a good fit for me. So I kind of knew back then, but we had little kids and I was so exhausted, 1 from deconverting, 2 from finishing a bachelor's degree with little kids. And so like, I was just like, I just want to work a job and like not like stress about homework at night or whatever.
Yeah.
So that kind of took me on a path that like just now I'm kind of getting off of and trying to I feel like my life's starting to get back on track, you know? And so I've really liked, I've learned something about myself. Well, 1, the tutoring has kind of shown me that like, I really like teaching and I kind of already knew that, but it was a good confirmation. And I'm getting to meet people from around the world and hear about their culture a little bit. And that's something that I didn't really think I was really into that much, but like, I love it. I love hearing about like, you know, what their day-to-day life is like, what their city's like, you know, things like that. It's really cool to learn those things. So
you probably have to get up at some weird hours to match their time zones.
I used to. So like when I first quit my job last year, I was teaching Chinese children and adults at like middle of the night, you know, like 3 a.m, you know, and that was insane and not good for my mental health. But I was able to kind of, you know, transition from that to tutoring during regular hours. So now I have a normal hours and it's worked out really good, but I've really enjoyed that. So that's kind of what I've been doing with the goal of like you said, like becoming a history teacher.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's kind of the plan, I think, for now.
You mentioned school. What school did you go to?
I went to, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was called Trinity Lutheran College.
Okay.
And it was just a 4-year college. It really focused on like biblical studies was one of the majors. I think multicultural studies was one. They had just a few majors. It was a pretty small college. And then they ended up having financial trouble, I think. And so they went under.
What was your major in?
Biblical studies.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So
we'll definitely, I'm sure we'll touch on that again here as we go through your story.
Yeah.
But I'd love to just start by just asking you a little bit about your background. What were you exposed to as growing up, especially religiously? What were the expectations? What was your relationship with God like as you from the earliest recollection you have?
Yeah. So, I mean, growing up, like my earliest memories of religion were like, my dad would read us stories when we were really young about, they were like moral stories, but they always had a Christian like answer to the moral, like to the problem in the story, so someone was being mean to somebody else and like, you should love your neighbor, these kind
Right.
of things. And so that was kind of my introduction. And then we would go to church every Sunday. We didn't miss a Sunday. Like there were one or two. So I was a huge like NFL football fan when I was a kid, of football at all, anything football. But and so I remember like very distinctly like one of like the two times when I was a kid where we didn't have to go to church because I got to watch the Seahawks play the Chiefs. It was a 10 a.m. start, and that's usually when you're at church. So I was so excited as a kid, for that. So I remember those things, but that just kind of tells you like my parents were very like consistent about that. My dad was an usher in the church, so he was very involved in like serving in that sense. And he was always there,
Was that a Lutheran church you were at?
It actually wasn't. It's a covenant church.
I've never heard
So
of that.
it's I would say it's like a mix between like, it's kind of a mix because it's pretty casual. People would wear like t-shirts and jeans, but when I was younger, you'd see more men like in like a dress shirt, so I think it kind of transitioned a bit.
Was the covenant part related to like covenant theology, or is it just the name they picked?
They said it came from a Lutheran type of background, but
Okay.
it was nothing like when I went to Trinity Lutheran College, like it was so formal and it was a mainline denomination. So it was totally different. We, in our church, people would speak in tongues on occasion. So maybe like once a month, someone would speak in tongues in front of the whole church and then someone would interpret it. So it had that element to it, but it was conservative. It was a conservative theology, Bible is literal. So that was kind of the church atmosphere growing up.
Can I ask, when you mentioned the Bible is literal, did that include or maybe I should just ask this way, what was their perspective on creationism versus evolution versus theistic evolution? Like, how did they portray that as worldview to you?
Evolution was not true. That was what I was taught. And whether like, it's funny because I don't ever remember like my parents saying that to me or a pastor saying that, but like, I think just the people you're around, and maybe the pastor did, and I don't remember it, but that was just understood. Like evolution is not true. Like we don't believe that, we believe God created the earth, and so that was kind of how I grew up, understanding that God created everything. And
how old did it tell you the earth was?
well, I mean, I just kind of like, as I got older, I started getting interested in that more. And then you watch TV or you watch a Christian on TV who says 6,000 years. So that becomes kind of that's always what I thought, 6,000 years old.
It's funny. Yeah. And I remember a Christian posted something, and it was like they were trying to make a cut against an evolutionary perspective. And it was like, God made this 0.000000001 billion years ago, something like that. And it's something about making the point of, this was very recent in their perspective. So it's really funny to see.
That it is funny. Yeah.
I'm sure you've changed since then. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit, but what was the whole story of Jesus all about to growing up? Like what, to put it a different way, what is the way to get to be right with God from the way you were taught?
Yeah, from the way I was taught. It was like a very, very like evangelical kind of message. We are all sinners, and if you do something wrong, you ask for forgiveness and you ask, God to forgive you, and he'll forgive you because he loves you. But, as I got older, it very much felt like, especially when I got into my teen years, I felt like anytime I sinned or had a simple thought, like I needed to ask for forgiveness, because if I wasn't right with God and Jesus came back, that could be a problem, or like maybe I wouldn't go to heaven. And so there was always this uncertainty there. So there's a little bit of fear that I don't think I recognized, but I think a little bit of like, I better make sure that I check in with God and like, okay, I'm sorry for this or that. And then,
In the sense where you said the fear of if Jesus came back, were you talking about like the rapture teaching or something different?
Yeah, we believed in the rapture.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and just for anyone who doesn't know what that concept is, could you just explain that briefly?
Yeah. What we understood was like there was a movie about it from like the 1970s that we watched, and like it's kind of like some of these Kirk Cameron movies, like Thief in the Night. Yeah. And like people's like all of a sudden poof, people are gone and like their clothes are just sitting there, like we thought that might happen, like we just disappear and be in heaven. And if all of a sudden all your family disappeared and you were there, like you're in trouble,
Sorry,
and
tough luck.
it's going to be terrible. Yeah. So that's kind of what we understood. Yeah.
Did you have the it sounds like you had the fear then that you might potentially by I guess for various reasons, maybe if you misunderstood your security in Christ, or you just were sinning, that something might cause you to be one of the people that were left behind, and now you have to face the tribulation, and who knows where it's going to end up.
Right. And that went, I mean, tribulation was like, if you want to be saved after that, like you're going to suffer really bad,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think growing up knowing that like you that could happen to you. It wasn't something some people thought about it a lot. I didn't think about it a lot. I don't think it was more of like, just, something you knew that if you do something wrong, you have to ask for forgiveness and try to always stay right with God. And otherwise you risk something bad happening. It's kind of this fear-based love.
Yeah. Very much so. What were some of the primary influences for you for Christianity besides your parents and your pastor? Like, what else spoke into your world growing up?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when I was growing up until I got into high school, it was just, parents, family, friends, things like that. But Christianity wasn't, I think when we get to high school age, that's a lot of the times that's a time of life when we're forming our own thoughts anyway. And we're starting to make our life our own, starting to follow our interests and ask questions about anything. And for me, that's when I started to, I really remember playing football there was a group of church guys that would like get together after church sometimes and play football. And I loved football. So I went one time and was playing, and there was this like college age guy, and I was like a freshman in high school. So I was like, whoa, this is cool. This guy played high school football and when he was in high school and he was good. So I kind of admired his skill. And when we got together before the game, he prayed and he was very confident, one of these like, God, keep us safe. And like, we thank you for the ability to play, all this like cheesy stuff. But I was like kind of impressed by it. And then he was good. So it was kind of like, oh, wow, like this is cool, And so I think I kind of wanted to emulate that. I kind of wanted to be like that. And so he kind of was the first person. And he was in my life for just a couple of years. So it wasn't like he was around for a long time. But so that's kind of what I wanted to do. And then I remember thinking I shouldn't listen to like rap music or secular music. And eventually got rid of like a lot of my secular music, non-Christian music, and started listening to the Christian radio station. And so that's when I I would say like maybe end of like around my freshman year, sophomore years, when I started to kind of take my faith more seriously. And then things got really like, I don't know, like weird. Like my faith became fundamentalist is probably the better way to say that. Yeah.
What can I ask before we go into that in more detail?
Sure.
Was there a particular moment that you remember, or a day or whatever, that where you actually prayed a prayer and maybe what some people would call a sinner's prayer, or just you gave your life to Christ, you repented and accepted the gospel, or some people say, well, I just kind of remember always believing that. Yeah, I'm sure at one point I rededicated my life, but. And other people are like, no, there was a day like when I was, this years old, this preacher preached this sermon and it just hit all the right notes and I went forward. What was that like for you?
Well, like I would say many fundamentalists, I did it multiple times. So when I was like really little, my parents told me that my older sister had prayed the prayer of salvation with me. So, it's like this sweet story of like, a 5-year-old sitting with his like 6 or 7-year-old sister who's like leading him through prayer, doing what she thought was right to help me.
Every Christian parent's hope and dream.
Like dream, yeah. So that was like the story. So I didn't remember doing it, but that's what I did, and so I always knew I was saved. And then it was my freshman year, around that time of this kind of like Christian awakening in my life. I liked football, so like I really idolized these like tough guys, and so I kind of always wanted to be like that too. Like as a kid, like I'm tough, I'm a football player, like, and I'm sitting in the front pew of my uncle's church. So he's a pastor, or was a pastor. And they had a traveling preacher who came, and this guy was pretty like psychologically abusive in a way. And he doesn't like my uncle denounced him later on, but the guy came and it was like a revival thing. And so he's given this fiery sermon, and I'm in the front pew kind of like on the edge, and he started to talk about people hardening their hearts to God. And, like I thought of myself as like I'm tough, I'm strong. And so that's kind of like hardening your heart. Like if you don't let God in, if you're like, so I took that like a personal message to me, like God was saying, like, you need to open up to me and you need to be like, not harden your heart. And so that's when, I think I went forward for prayer. I did many times in that church, but either way, that was the moment when I basically rededicated my life to God and decided, okay, I'm going to take it seriously. And that's when got rid of the non-Christian music and stopped swearing at school.
Got to make sure it's real.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing. I forget how many times. I think I probably did it at least 5, 6, 7 times throughout especially my teenage years. Just that sense of like there is so much at stake here. Like you can't be wrong on this. You call it Pascal's wager, whatever, kicking in, but you have to be right, and you have to be doubly sure that you're right. Not just in the sense of like, I knew that God was right. I knew the Bible was right. I knew the gospel was the only way to have peace with God. But I wasn't sure if I really meant it or if I was just repeating it. Of course, you get in the whole question of people saying, well, you're just parroting the words because that's what your parents and friends believe. And so you're like, all right, I really need to make sure. And it's like, you know that, the heart is deceitful. It says, the heart is deceitful above all things, desperately wicked. Who can understand it? Like, your own heart can trick you. So you're like, all right, I got to make sure I'm not tricked on some level. Like, let's do the inception thing. Let's go to the deepest level and let's make sure that we are really saved at every level possible. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think it's just this constant. I think it's just kind of like a culture, like within fundamentalist Christianity. It's a culture of like you need to always make sure you're right with God. Like you got to stay on the path, like always checking in. Like am I doing good? Okay, and like just keep checking with God to make sure that you're like doing it right.
Yeah. Can I ask? This is something that came up for my journey a lot on that level. But what with the emergence of puberty and adolescence and sexuality, just the the whole thought process, seeing stuff that you want to look at, and sometimes you look away and sometimes you don't. The whole sense of the shame that comes with that. Did that play a part at all in your needing to like double check, like, okay, God, I clearly have a sin issue and I'm not taking sin seriously enough. Therefore, I'm going to make sure I've really accepted the gospel. Did that play a part? And then secondarily, just in a broader sense, like what was your, what part did the purity culture and the shame culture and just, whether it was, something really close with your church culture, or just in general, your understanding of Christianity, like what was it like dealing with that? And how did you deal with your thoughts in the sexual realm?
Yeah. So definitely from the time that I was like around 12, like that's when puberty kicks in, and for, a lot of kids, that's when you start, like seeing things that like kind of you're more attracted to than you were like, than you hadn't really noticed maybe, or like you start wanting to like explore that kind of thing. And absolutely, like it was like you sin and then you feel all this shame, like you feel horrible, like especially when I started to take my faith seriously. In my heart, I wanted nothing more, like, or a better way to say it, maybe like there was nothing I wanted more than to be right with God, because I knew like he was the most important thing in the universe, and more than football, more than family, like he was who I wanted to please. So if I was failing him like over and over and over, on a weekly basis, like throughout the week, like having to come back and ask for forgiveness again, and then trying so hard not to sin, and then sinning, feeling like I'm broken, like I'm like, that's how you felt, or that's how I felt like when I would quote sin. And so it was a struggle, and that was definitely a huge part of it. And so I guess that's purity culture. It wasn't really talked about like that then, I don't think, but it was definitely, looking at women lustfully is a sin, like in the Bible. So Anyway, yeah, that was definitely a big part of like the struggle as an adolescent guy, growing up. You just feel like you can't do it right. And so I think that kind of perpetuates this, like the more you let God down, the more you need him,
Yes.
and then you want to please him so bad, and then you fail him again. And it's just like, now you want to please him even more. And so it's like you get more and more extreme to try to show your devotion and to try to prove to yourself, I think, that you really do love him, even though you're failing him. You do, you care. Yeah.
Yeah. It really puts you too in a psychological spot of just what James would call double-mindedness. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And it's like what's the psychological term I'm thinking of? It's something where you've got two personalities, a Jekyll and Hyde. And it's like you're internally, you're like, I want to please God, but I'm also, driven to sexual thoughts or whatever. And then you're also from the, perspective of God, like, God is so loving. He loves me so much. He forgives me, but he's also really angry, especially if you grew up more of in a sinners in the hands of an angry God perspective, which I did a little bit. You know that God is very angry, and even if he's not technically angry at you at this moment because you're washed in the blood, you're sealed for redemption, that technically your sins are what nailed Jesus to the cross. And you get these sermons where it's like every time you sin, it's like you are the Roman soldier taking the hammer and pounding it in and making Jesus wince, from the pain.
Yeah.
And that intense shame of like, shame on you, you should know better. And it puts people in such a conundrum of I feel like I'm safe with God, but I'm not. I feel like I can be honest with God, but I can't. I feel like I'm really trying to serve God, but I'm not. And this whole, just your heart and your mind are torn like all the time, especially with what Hitchens would point out about how it's like celestial North Korea, where like he can see inside your mind. Like this isn't just, God isn't just saying, well, as long as you go to church and you do the right things, you don't outside lie, I'm okay. It's like God is looking at your heart. He can see when you looked twice at that girl when you shouldn't have. He knows what you did, and you can't hide from him. And it feels like you got this spotlight and these cameras inside your head,
Yeah. It's really abusive. It's interesting because I was thinking like it's abusive in the sense that like you can't there's no, like when you're in an abusive relationship, I'm just saying, like in theory, like if you were, there aren't maybe good reasons to stay, right? Like rational reasons to like stay in that relationship. So like the fear is what keeps you,
Yeah.
And so I think for like, I think that plays a big role, just feeling a kind of like you're tied, like you can't leave, he's everything, I don't know. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
It also puts you in the spot of always, like you said, being driven back to God for it, because it's like you get the really strong message, you are nothing without God. And I remember growing up, we used to talk about this concept of we're beggars, but now that we're believers, we're beggars who know where to find the bread. So go find the bread, get back to God, and tell other people that are lost how to find the bread. But admit all the time you are still a beggar. You don't have the bread, so the bread is outside of you, but you found the source of it. And it's like this idea of you can't claim any self-righteousness. There's nothing good in you, and that's really clear. All righteousness is like a filthy rag. There's no one that does good, not even one person. And so that you are the problem. And that one of the biggest things that I struggle with for other people, just seeing the angst of them in their hearts with their walk with Christ, so to speak, is they know that if there's a problem in their joy, in their diligence with their devotional life, whatever it is, the problem is not God. It can't be God. God can never be the problem. It has to be you. And we know, total depravity, we know you're broken. So you're the problem. And it's like hammered in, you're the problem. And boy, oh boy, you tell people that enough, they believe it.
Well, and even worse, if you are a Christian and then you turn away from God, it's like you knew better. Like you're worse than the non-believer now. So once you're in, like it's even worse if you leave. Like you would have been better to never come in at all. And so it just like doubles down on the like layers of guilt and the layers of fear, I think.
There's no more sacrifice for sin left at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, I believe like a lot of like evangelical Christians, I believe that God was loving ultimately, and like the Old Testament God was like different from, like, it was still God, but like he changed his way of dealing with people now. So like
Yeah.
it's kind of like, yeah, he used to be abusive and terrible and murderous, but like he's loving now, so it's different. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're forgiving God for his past sins,
Which is funny. That
in a
was one of
way.
the early church. Some of the early church believers had that in mind. I mean, they were eventually labeled heretics, obviously, but some of the early Christians definitely believed that there
Yeah.
were truly two gods. That this was two
Yeah,
different
that was
stories.
interesting learning that, like, basically, it was kind of like majority rules or whatever. I mean, I don't remember the details of these councils, but it essentially, it wasn't like these doctrines were just in place from the beginning. They like evolved.
Yeah.
Christians hate evolution, but like that's how their religion came to be.
Yeah.
It
And,
was like a form of like evolution, it
yeah.
evolved over time. So
And a lot of fighting, a lot of cover-ups.
yeah.
Well, can I ask? I do want to go into some of those things that you studied, but before
Uh-huh.
we dive too deep into that,
Sure.
could you just take us up to kind of all the final steps before you started to see cracks? What else happened? You obviously got pushed or encouraged to go into ministry of some kind. Like how did this kind of get ramped up to? I mean, I guess like a pinnacle. And what was
Yeah.
the pinnacle like of your relationship with God? Did you feel peace? Did you feel like you saw answered prayers? Did you ever see something you call a miracle from God? Like,
Hmm.
what was it like as you kind of got into the true meat of the word, the meat of your walk with Christ, right before
Yeah.
any cracks appeared?
Yeah, so for me, I talked a little bit about how much I loved football when I was a kid, and this may seem weird to people, but I think it won't in a way. But I loved it so much, like I wanted to, when I was a kid, I wanted to play professional football. Like that was like my only hope in life,
Hmm.
And it's not uncommon for kids to have these dreams of like being an actor, being a professional sports star or something.
Yeah.
Um, and so like I wanted that really bad. And so like when I got into like the later years of my high school, like I was starting to, whether it was because of realizing that I would never play at a high level because of like my size and stuff and my speed. And um, I was probably realizing that. So whether it's because of that or just because of like genetics, I think I was starting to have some depression because I can remember just like dreading things and like not having motivation for things. But it was just kind of starting for me. So I didn't recognize that at all. Like later looking back, I can say, well, maybe that was depression. But either way, I was struggling. I was going through this thing. The only thing I like, besides like my relationship with God, the only thing I cared about like vocationally or like purpose for the purpose of my life, that thing was like slowly like fading.
Mm.
And so that was like a mourning process for me, like having to go through that and accept that like I won't be able to do this thing that I love so much. And it wasn't just like a hobby, like, well, if I get to play it on weekends with friends, I'm fine. Like for me, it was like it had to be everything.
Mm.
And I was obsessed. Like I always tell people, like I played video games, but they were always football video games. Like I did other things, but like I remember playing with other toys as a kid, and like I made like the cars into like teams, like, or the little whatever, like that was my world. So when that started to fade, it felt like, okay, all these dreams of like, trust God and he'll give you the desires of your heart. I didn't believe that God would give me everything I wanted, but like some of the verses in the Bible kind of make you think, well, but if I do it right, he'll either help me or like it'll be like a version of what I wanted, maybe
Right.
a little different or something. But
Sanctified version.
yeah, so maybe I won't have it exactly the way I wanted or whatever, but like he'll help me through. And you keep doing everything right, to try to please God and hope that like these things come true for you. And then like a very like poignant moment for me was in my dorm freshman year at college, listening to a Rich Mullins song, which I still like. It's a special song for me.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard the Rich Mullins song "Hard to Get"?
Sounds familiar. I may
Okay,
have.
so yeah, he was a like really popular Christian singer back in like the 80s, I think.
Oh yeah, no, I remember listening to him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's this really great song because he recorded it like I don't know, with like a tape recorder or something. So it sounds really rough and and his voice wasn't that great, right? Like that was always something about him that was interesting, but his songwriting was really good. And so he writes this song about how like you live in heaven, we're down here on earth. And then he kind of goes through these like differences between God and people. And then the chorus is always, you're hard to get, like you're hard to understand. And it's this really like honest kind of discussion in this song about how God is hard to get. And then in one of the lines he says, you're playing hard to get. And it's so interesting because he's like a Christian icon, you know? So he said, there's a line in that song where he says, and I memorized every word you said. And I remember when I heard that for the first time, I like burst into tears because I was like by myself in my college dorm room, like coping with the loss of like my childhood dream, you know? And it was so powerful. Like God, like, you know, I love you. Like, why would you just let like my dream crumble? And I didn't really hear anything from God. I wasn't really hearing a response. And so when I was at college, my freshman year, I was applying to a Christian college. So I was at a public university my first year. And then during that time was like, okay, I'm going to go to a Christian college and I'm going to, you know, like try to be a pastor. I ended up not going to that Christian college, but that started my path because started me down the path to go to Trinity Lutheran College and get my degree. But that's really important for my story, I think, because it shows that like I went through this huge loss. It was really hard to cope with. And my response was to run right back to God, like to double down and not just like try to trust him more, but like serve him, like spend my days like being a pastor and like helping other people come to Jesus. So like I doubled down on it. So I didn't like say God failed me, forget God, you know, like it was, right back to him.
Was any of that motivation like the sense of like, God, I will do whatever you call me to do, and almost like an invitation, like to God, if there's a part of me that's unwilling to bend my knees to you, please break me. Please take away what you have to take away. I remember praying to God,
exactly.
God, deprive me of what you need to. If I need to be quadriplegic in a wheelchair to honor you, do it. I want to be whatever it takes for me to be a vessel that's sanctified and ready for your use and that gives you glory.
Exactly.
And boy, you've been reading the Bible. I think it's though he slay me, yet I will praise him. Like God,
that's it. Yeah.
You gotta do what you gotta do, and it's almost like this sense of taking your dreams. You're at the give yourself, if you delight in the Lord, He'll give you the desires of your heart. It becomes this story of, if you delight yourself in the Lord, He will give you the desires of your heart, but the desires of your heart become the Lord. And so it switches the verse a little bit. And so if you delight in the Lord, He will give you Himself. And like He will give you a heart that wants Him, and everything else, like the things of this earth will grow. What's that hymn? Will grow. Will get dim, dark and dim, and we'll see the shining light of His glorious face. Something I'm exposing how long I've been deconverted.
Oh no, it's fine. Yeah, I've forgotten so many verses.
But the things of this world will grow dim, and you won't care about them, and you just want to see His glorious face more and more, and that becomes the desire of your heart. And boy, that if you feel that pull, boy, does it feel like, oh, I finally get it. I get the spiritual life. The life is not about anything I want. It's about giving myself up to be a true servant of Christ.
Yep, because I felt like that's the only path. And you always hear that like once God breaks you, or once you're a broken person, then God can use you.
Yeah.
So like there might be a greater purpose for my life that I'm not seeing. So if God destroys my childhood dream, like it's going to be okay. There's a plan, as painful as this is for me, like keep going. And that was what I did, so that's kind of what set up like going to a Bible college in 2002 was when I enrolled in Bible school. And at that point was very fundamentalist. And my wife and I decided we weren't going to use birth control because we thought it was sinful. And that's pretty extreme. Like there aren't many Christians that do that, at least in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
So I think it's very rare, but we were doubling down, like even willing to like have babies forever,
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds insane, but that was what, we were just doing everything we could to just please Him, make sure we were on the right path,
Yeah. And for anyone who doesn't know that kind of background, there's two sides I think to it. One of them is the medical side of it, is that anything that's going to prevent, not like a condom, but any kind of pill or anything that could line thin the lining of the uterus, where you could technically get a fertilized egg, but then it couldn't implant. It's effectively abortive. Therefore, you're taking part in that, the murderous mentality of that, world. But also, just in terms of the positive side of it, we need to, raise up little armies for Christ.
Christians, yeah.
We need to truly outbreed the pagans. And
yeah.
I mean, what better way to increase, you if you eventually get 90% Christians, well, which way do you think the vote's going to swing? It's like, if you have so many Christians, you're going to win. And so that was a lot of that, for at least for me, from my perspective, is you got to do that. And yeah, I can definitely relate.
Were you and your wife on that path, like not using birth control?
Yes, absolutely. Although I would say that was a background for us.
Mm-hmm.
We have for anyone who doesn't know my story, we have 4 children currently, very young. At the time of this recording, they're very little kids. So 4 kids under age 7. We just love kids. So it wasn't just this issue of we need to outbreed people.
Kind of worked out.
We love children.
Yeah.
We both do. And we, even as a atheist, I love my kids. They're my life, my joy. So there was no part of me that wanted to, and I still would, I'd be open to having more kids if circumstances allow. My wife, she would read stuff like from the Duggars, where there's a book they wrote called Love That Multiplies, or something like that. And, she's got friends, she's from Montana, but she's got friends in Montana that have 12 kids. And it's like, that's the good life. That's the pure goodness of the richness of when God blesses you, is you have your quiver full. And so we were on that path in a sense, but I would say it was less about that for us. It was more just, we love little kids. They're so awesome.
Yeah. We, ours was more like just, we were reading Bible, like when I asked my wife, who was my fiance at the time, like, what kind of birth control should we use? We started talking about it, and she wasn't comfortable with a lot of them. I'm not blaming my wife for this. This was like definitely our decision. And, but it sounds funny when I start talking about it, but like, as we discussed it, we were like, yeah, well, what's the Bible say? And so then you start finding, like, blessed is the man whose quiver is full. And you're like, oh, well, God really praises people like that. And then in Malachi, it talks about children being the purpose of marriage, and then be fruitful and multiply. There's all these verses you can find that support that idea. And then you start seeking out Christians online that, like, I found an online group way back in like 2000 or whatever, that was like, they were quiverful people.
Yeah.
And it all kind of confirmed, like, yeah. And then I read a book about it. I found a book at the Christian bookstore that talked about why we shouldn't use birth control. Ironically enough, in that book, there was like a chapter on China, which I had no idea why that had anything to do with, the Bible and birth control. But anyway, it kind of shows you politics and Christianity just love each other.
Was it the 2-child policy thing at that time?
It might have been like the 1-child policy or whatever.
The 1-child,
yeah. But anyway, so we looked at the Bible, and like when we were like all in, like, okay, this is whatever God asked you to do, you do it. Like, that's what Christians do. You don't like think, oh, it's too hard, or, and all my, my parents are all of our parents, my grandmother, like the people in our lives were all saying like, are you sure? And, nicely trying to say, well, have you thought about this? But it didn't matter if we felt like God was telling us to do it. It doesn't matter what other people say, as much as we care about them and love them and listen to their feedback. Like, we're going to do what God wants. So that's what ended up putting us on that path. So started college, going to be a pastor, had one son that had just been born about 6 months prior to that. So we were starting college with a baby.
Wow.
That's rough. So this is kind of how it started, and got, I was very conservative my first 2 years there.
Can I ask, before you go into the deconversion part, can I ask you?
Sure.
2 questions. Number one, when you were growing up, did you have much exposure to non-Christians, and how did you relate to them? or even just discussions like, if you meet a Christian, if you meet, a Buddhist, if you meet an atheist, this is what you think about where they're at, and this is how you deal with it. Were you evangelical in that sense? And then could you also take us into the whole calling toward a pastorate? How did you first feel like that was, something that you really felt God was putting in your heart?
Okay, so interactions with non-Christians, the earliest one I remember is this kid when I was 8 years old who said that he believed in evolution. He
Okay.
might have been Christian, but to me, if you believe in evolution, you're an atheist. That's what I thought then.
Yeah.
And so this kid says something about believing in evolution, and I remember laughing at him and being like, "You're crazy! Like, how can you believe that? It's so silly." So that was my feeling toward people who believed in evolution or maybe weren't Christian. Like,
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Like, how can you believe differently than I do? That's kind of how I felt as a kid.
It's like, you really think we came from monkeys? Really?
Yeah, that was
Come
it.
on.
Like, like how silly,
Yeah.
But other than that, like when I got into high school and I started becoming really Christian, like I just wanted to be a good example to my peers. And so like the kids that were partying and like not Christian or not living out their Christian faith, like the way that, maybe I was taught that they should, I just tried to be a good person and like not judge them, but like I led little like a prayer group my senior year before football games. We would even get together on weekends like to like do that. So it was around that time, kind of getting into the second part of your question. It was around that time, like sophomore year in high school, that I started to like dive into the Bible and study it. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed learning about it and digging into the verses. And I had a study Bible, so I would like cross-reference things, and it was fascinating to me. And I like history, and I've always liked archaeology. And so these, TV shows about it, everything, like I just really enjoyed learning about the Bible. So it seemed like this is a natural kind of course. Like if football's not going to be my future, then this is a perfect fit. I'm really interested in it, and it's God. You can't go wrong, I thought. So that's kind of what led me down that path, I think. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was very, very similar. A lot of our stories have a lot of crisscrosses, not one for one across the board, but I was very similar. It felt like what better life could you have than to be in the Word all day and preaching the gospel as much as you can. I mean, there's no better life.
Yeah, and I think I even was giving sermons like to my youth group when I was from the time I was 16 to the time I graduated. I would, at various churches, I would give sermons like to the youth group, and so I would study some passage and then learn about it and then come up with like a 20-minute, 30-minute talk on it. So I was kind of like exercising that muscle, and the lifestyle of a pastor. I saw my uncle was a pastor, so I got to see what his life was like. And it seemed cool. Like you get to study a book during the week or like learn something, and then you share it with people once a week. It sounds fun. And what's interesting now is when I look back, I can see the parallels to teaching. You know what I mean? And that's really what I loved, was the idea of like learning something and sharing it with people. Yeah. And that's kind of what confirmed for me. That's one of the things that confirmed for me that like teaching was a good fit for me. What I realized in Bible school early on was that the ministry piece, like the more like counselor, coming alongside someone who's having a rough day, I was not good at that. Like I can be empathetic and caring like anyone, but like that's not my skill set. And I felt so awkward and uncomfortable, and I did not know how to respond to people in some of those situations. And that's when I was like, wait a second, maybe I shouldn't be a pastor. So that kind of was in my early college years. I realized that.
Okay, so there was some questioning there. What were, if I know that probably at the time you wouldn't have called them cracks, but looking back, what were some of the earliest cracks that happened, that you recall that may have eventually played a bigger role in your thought process?
Okay. It's hard to think back like to the early years. I mean, I think like a lot of Christians, there's one moment I remember when I was about 12, lying on my bed and just looking out the window at the moon, and it felt really empty and quiet in my room. And I remember praying to God to like show me something, or like try to like make, let me know that he's there. And it was just dead silence. And of course I just chalked it up to like, God's not going to, like, God doesn't like to be tested, but
That's
But
interesting. It was almost like that. What's that one where that he's like, make the shadow move backwards instead of forward, or like Elijah, God, make this pillar with the rocks burn up. I'll drench it with water even, and I'll put a moat around it and still, make
yeah,
it
yeah.
open fire,
Or I
like a little
think
test.
I forget the guy's name, but the fleece, like he puts he
Yeah,
tests God
Gideon.
by putting it, Gideon,
Gideon.
that might, yeah. So there are many examples of Christians testing God, or anyway, people in the Bible testing God. But that was just like kind of a little thing. As far as things that played a big role, the cracks, I think seeing that like something that God knew I cared about a lot, not kind of come to pass, was like really upsetting and troubling for me. So it was a crack in the sense that like when you're broken and you're at your lowest point, that's when Christianity is supposed to be at its best. Like the message of the Bible is like when you are nothing, God will swoop you up, and like he will like grab you up in his arms, and like he's gonna make it okay, and he's gonna
Yeah.
help you. And that never happened. And it's like if God's not there for you in your weakest, lowest point, in your lowest moment in life, then like then the message of the Bible's not true,
Yeah.
like that message is not accurate. If he's not going to be there for you in your darkest moment, then
Yeah.
it's not true. So that's kind of,
Mine was, again, so similar. Mine was focused more on missions than pastorate. I wanted to be a pastor as well, and that's actually what my degree is in. I went to Lancaster Bible College in Pennsylvania with a degree in, in Bible and pastoral ministry. But towards the end of it, I got convicted that there were passages, the pastoral epistles talk about what a pastor should be, and it talks about that they should be number one, elders, so older men, but they also should have raised a family where you can see the good path. You can raise 3 or 4 kids to be godly people. So now that you've raised 3 or 4 kids, now we'll give you a bigger congregation. But test yourself first. And I was like, okay, so young men shouldn't be pastors. That was my conviction at the time.
it's interesting.
Like, okay, what do I want to do next? And I loved foreign languages. I remember, I learned French very quickly. During Bible college, I studied Spanish, to Japanese, to Gaelic. Was doing some German, certainly Greek and Hebrew. I loved languages are so cool. I love studying even the origins of English, the English language. And I saw this video from a missions group where this guy and his wife had gone into a tribal jungle environment and had learned spent a year or 2 learning the language and the culture, and then they began to develop an alphabet for these people because a lot of people don't have alphabets yet. And so after they developed an alphabet, for probably another couple of years, they eventually started to translate the Bible into their new language. And then, of course, they come to the pinnacle point, which is they actually preach the message. So they go chronologically through the Old Testament, tell people, there's only one God. There's not all these little spirits in the trees. There's only one God. He created everything, and he wants, blood has to be perfect, perfect sacrifice, a spotless lamb. And so they get people all the way up to the gospel, and then people realize, oh, he's the spotless lamb that God sent to be sacrificed for us. And this whole tribe, en masse, like I think probably at least 100 or so people came to faith in Christ and just erupted in joy. Yay, God's our Savior. And I saw that and I thought, oh, that's it. That's what I'm gifted for. It's language. I love foreign languages.
Makes sense.
And like most people don't want to go. Christians are like, I want to live my white picket fence life. I'm like, I'll do it. I'll go. Pick me. Who will go for us? Here, my Lord, send me. So I'm like, I did it. And several things, and I'll tell my story another day, but several things came up and just blew up in my face. And I mean to tell you, it was like, wait a second, God, these people are going to die and burn in hell if no one preaches the gospel. I am saying I'm willing to go. And every time I move forward, the door slams in my face. Like, I'm sorry, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to be a pastor. That door is shut. I want to be a missionary and preach the gospel to people that don't have it. That door shuts over and over. I'm like, what else do I have to do to be a servant of Christ? And that was not the thing that deconverted me by any stretch. I mean, that was not even remotely what did it, but it certainly was like a crack. It was like, this just doesn't feel right anymore.
Yeah.
Something's off here. And there was a lot of other points to it that I'll tell you more of my story someday, but it's interesting that when you get knocked off your horse, it does make you think twice.
Yeah. And, I'm kind of sensitive to this idea that like people become atheists because God doesn't answer a prayer.
Yeah,
Like, I think Christians love that narrative. And, like, uh, well, it kind of makes me mad because it's like a dismissive way to be like, oh, you didn't get what you wanted, so
yeah,
you left. You know,
yeah.
uh,
You're the selfish atheist.
yeah. But the thing for me is like one, that's a good reason. Like if God says like he loves you and like he's going to like help you and like he doesn't, like, he's not who he says he is. So it should make you doubt. Of course, you're supposed to have faith, and never doubt him, and he's never wrong, so he can never be wrong. So it's always your fault. So that's just always going to be true. But for me, it wasn't even that. Like I said, when I doubted God and when I was broken and like I ran to him and was like, okay, I'm doubling down, Um, and so it became more of an academic thing of studying the Bible. And if I knew the Bible really, really well, I would know God really, really well. And that's what I wanted because I was confused. I didn't understand what had happened in my life, and I needed to like dig into the Bible to figure out. Um, and I needed to follow his path, to be in the ministry because I felt like this was the way to understand God. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of what led to some further cracks. And without jumping ahead too far, probably just before I realized I wasn't Christian, and it wasn't clear to me that this was happening, but I started to learn about the Bible and learn about how some of the like Old Testament stories are allegory or could be viewed as allegory or metaphor, and that many mainline Christians do see it that way. And that was like so exciting to me because I thought I don't have to believe and defend like the talking snake or like some of these crazy miracles that are really ridiculous, but that I would try to defend because it's in the Bible and I need to, believe it because God wants me to believe what's in the Bible. I have to, if I believe in God, I have to defend everything that's in there. But learning that I could still be a Christian and a good person and not have to believe these silly things, it kind of made me excited. So that was kind of one of the final cracks, I think.
Did that scare you though, of the whole question of becoming, a liberal Christian? And it's like, if this is a parable, if that's a parable, maybe the whole thing's a parable. What if God's a
Right.
parable? Like, how did you
Yeah.
deal with the slippery slope?
Well, initially, I did not like liberal Christianity, and I was like my sophomore year at the school. I was the Iraq War was starting to ramp up. Uh, the second Iraq War, and people who were like liberal students were speaking out against the war, and I was listening to Sean Hannity on the radio. I was super conservative, and I was like posting like Bible verses about like supporting like it sounds weird, but like supporting going to war. But I had I don't remember, it was a verse from Jeremiah about like, people say that everything's fine, that there's peace, but there is no peace. Like things aren't fine,
Hmm.
like sometimes you need to do something if there's a wrong happening in the world, and that's kind of how I was seeing it at the time. So I was really conservative then. Um, but and I did not like liberal politics or theology. I was not okay with it. I felt like it was a watering down of Christianity and it was wrong. I thought they were wrong. But the more I studied the Bible, the more I learned about different perspectives, and how the Bible kind of came together. Those kinds of things really made me start to be more open to other ideas. And that's kind of what led me to reading a book in this class about about how to view the Bible and how it's viewed in different parts of Christianity. At that point, because I was, I think, kind of like a ship at sea, just kind of floating around, like the fact that there might be like a light over there that I could kind of follow was encouraging. I was kind of like, oh, maybe this is the direction. Like I didn't really know where to go with my faith. And so I was still a very strong Christian my junior year in college, but it gave me hope, actually. And yes, it did lead to me asking, well, okay, well, what about Jesus? Like how do we view him? um, and that led to me kind of starting to throw around the idea that Jesus might have just been like a prophet of God or like a really great teacher who taught really wonderful things, but like maybe he wasn't divine. And I was mulling this over and like talking about it with my wife, because I talked to her about a lot of things I was learning, which was really troubling to her. And it was very upset to her. And she was rattled by all these things I was learning because we were living on campus. So I'd come back from class and like just share what I'd heard. And we'd get into like little arguments about theology because it was very upsetting to her. She was still a conservative Christian. And it was me washing dishes, chatting with her one time, telling her about the divinity or the lack of divinity or maybe the humanity of Jesus. And it completely shocked me because at one moment she just goes, "You're not a Christian anymore." Just said it, like there was not like, "Hey, do you think yet?" I mean, she just said it. And like, I remember just being stunned and like, "What are you talking about? Like, that's ridiculous."
That was really interesting.
Yeah, I was like not letting myself think about what was really happening. I think part of me knew that I'm heading down this path, but then part of me was just not going to let my brain think about the consequences of that. And it's when she said that it was like I always say, like, it's like if someone splashed cold water in your face when you're talking to them, like it kind of wakes you up and like shocks you. But it kind of did that for me. And that's when I started going like, oh, well, what do I believe? And if I don't believe Jesus is divine, can I really say that I'm a Christian? And my conclusion was no, I can't. And so then I began kind of a short, like time in my life of trying to think about, well, what am I? What do I believe? And I looked into Buddhism a little bit to see like, well, maybe there's something there that's like, that's good. And because you feel lost when you deconvert from Christianity, you feel like you should have something. You should be a something. I should be a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Christian. I should be a something. Being an atheist just it felt like you were a nothing. Like you didn't believe in anything. Like
it's really
you don't
interesting
stand for anything.
You went down that path, because I've heard of a lot of other people do that too. Mine was so like, to me, I guess as a Christian, it was painted as like Christianity is the best. We preach grace. Everyone else preaches works. We preach, Christ alone. Everyone else is preaching, like the Catholic Church, it's Christ plus Mary plus the saints. Everyone's preaching. You go, pray through your priest. We pray directly to God through Christ. Like we have the best. Everyone else is doing animal sacrifices still. Christ is our perfect sacrifice once and for all. And it was like everything is like the best. He is the best. Not just in the sense of like we're trying to compare gods as if we're in a pantheon and he's the best one, but just in terms of just if you're looking at it, just saying, okay, if you had to just from a human perspective pick a religion, Christianity is clearly the best one. Even if it's just a purely human effort to pick one, and God has nothing to do with it, it's truly the best system out there. And so to me, it was like, if that's not true, what am I going to do? Pick number 2 and 3 on the mid list? Like, I want number 1 or I don't want anything.
It's one or nothing. Yeah.
But some people I've heard have gone very much to say like, no, that's not necessarily the healthiest perspective. There may be, and it's true. Like, what if Christianity was the wrong one? And what if Buddhism was their truth, the closest to truth? Like, why would you discount that? I did discount it, but it's not necessarily the right way to see it.
Yeah. Well, we all kind of go through our own process and we all kind of take a different path out of Christianity. And, for whatever reason. And for me, just for like, I would say probably, I don't know, maybe like a few months or 6 months or something. I remember being at Trinity Lutheran College on their computer in the computer lab, reading about Buddhism. And I remember reading this Buddhist site, and it was really kind of there's of course secular Buddhism, and that's totally cool. It's like atheistic Buddhism. But at the time I'm looking for like something like that, but I was reading this Buddhist and it was talking about miracles and like some like spiritual stuff. So I was kind of, and maybe it wasn't miracles, but it was like very spiritual and very like, I think it was something like that. Cause I remember thinking, this is just a different version of Christianity. This is just like me believing silly things and like that aren't true and don't make any sense. And that's what I want to leave. I want to leave the illogical fantasy world. I don't want to, knowing it's not true anymore. I don't want to, sorry, I don't mean to be insulting to if anybody's Christian, but like that's, if I don't believe in miracles anymore and I don't believe in divinity and gods and things like, then I'm not going to go run to another version of that. I'm going to just go well, I guess I don't really believe anything. I don't adhere to any faith. And that was kind of my first step out, not knowing really where to go. I was lost, you know?
Yeah. As a quick side note, and I don't want to
Yeah.
make this a big point, but I've been one of the biggest things that took me out of Christianity, not the only thing, but one of the big things was comparative mythology, comparative religion, realizing that,
Cool.
there's so many parallels, and not just parallels, but actually probably some significant influence, not if we want to say
Yeah.
that correlation is causation, but just that there are some parallels that are kind of freaky. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
and I didn't honestly have my ducks in a row about Buddhism's history. I would say I still don't, but I knew even less back then about Buddhism. And I didn't, if anyone would have said Buddhism may have influenced the origins of Christianity, I would have said, I think
I
we're
doubt
talking
that.
about two different parts of the world. And I think you're talking about two different times. And once I realized what was going on, I was realizing that, it looks like there actually may be some influence. It's not probably the main influence as
Yeah.
compared to like, Mithraism and Zoroastrianism and all the others, but certainly because compared to Greek mythology. But there
Right.
is a lot of stuff there, and even like just watching a video and I'll do a plug here for Myth Vision. If anyone doesn't know Myth Vision podcast, please sign up. Derek Lambert is the
Cool.
man. But they were just recently doing one about Buddhism and the 500 witnesses. Remember the 500 witnesses of Christ of his, or of the
In
ascension.
Revelation? Or?
I think in Acts where he's
Oh.
ascended up. 500 witnesses of Christ. Post resurrection. Well, Buddhism had 500 witnesses, just like it.
Yeah.
But earlier,
that's a good point. Yeah.
500 exactly. And anyway, that's a side note. But it's
right.
interesting
But there's these parallels. There's absolutely parallels, and that's what Christians do not like to hear. That there were other like sacrifice saviors who rose from the dead.
Yeah, lots of them.
Yeah. And so that's what's crazy is like if your savior just is one of many, then what makes yours so special?
Yeah.
Like
And
there are a lot of great things about these other, yeah.
And more importantly, maybe for me, is it possible that it's not just like, is it not special, but is it possible that this actually evolved from those other stories?
Right. Like, so is the original not Christianity, is the original actually Buddhism, is the original actually Hinduism or some other faith, that was older.
Yeah. I mean, there were,
right.
These, and this is I know a side note, but it's good to mention here, but there were other religions already talking immensely about blood sacrifice. Certainly the Egyptians, I think, Israel got it from Egypt, although I've been learning about Israel was probably descended from Egypt, with the Hyksos, but, even if they were separate, that the Egyptians were doing blood sacrifice and worship on the Sabbath, circumcision, all long before the Jews were. But then you get later on to like more of the time of Christ, and the Mithras would take baths in where the bull would be shed above them and some kind of grate, and they would be in like a tunnel underneath, and someone would shed the blood of this bull, and the blood would shower over you, and you would get cleansed by the blood. And when they wanted to be initiated into these mystery cults, they would have two main rituals, and you can guess what they are. We're going to baptize you in water, and we're going to have a communion meal where we eat bread and wine or bread and beer, and thus you become part of our family, and we're going to call you brother and sister. And it's like they were doing this stuff already all over the place. And I know this stuff, just for the viewers.
No, I like hearing you talk about it. Yeah, it's good.
It's just it's so amazing. And Christians, if you watch apologists talk about this stuff, they are so deceptive and they are charlatans. I mean, to the core, some of these guys, they just want to say, there's nothing. I mean, there's some places that have taken it too far. Zeitgeist has been an issue where people want to say the Zeitgeist movie made stuff up, about how many virgin births there were, how many people had birthdays on December 25th. Granted, there's some people that take the astrotheology and that take the pagan parallels too far, but just because some people take it too far doesn't mean there's still not dozens and dozens of examples that are legitimate left. And it's fascinating. It really is.
Yeah, that is something that actually, that was another thing I considered. Was I was thinking about going to a university near my house to get a graduate degree. This is when I first deconverted. I thought about getting a graduate degree in comparative religion, because I thought, well, I know religion, I know Christianity really well. This is kind of a natural, but then that path would have been become a college professor. Like, you can't teach comparative religion in high schools generally, as far as I know. And it's, and if you could, there wouldn't be many jobs. So the idea of continuing education was like, I am burnt out. I cannot do this for a while.
Yeah.
But I had thought about it, and I'm actually reading Joseph Campbell's book right now. Are you familiar with Joseph Campbell?
It sounds familiar. I don't remember the
He is like
title.
an expert. He's died many years ago, but like he was an expert on mythology.
Okay.
And so it's called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And the hero's journey, this idea of like stories and mythologies and religions all have a similar type of course that their hero takes, and it's so fascinating. And just, he's bringing up like other religions, and he's bringing up like fairy tales and comparing like all of them and the similarities. And so I'm loving it. So I'm really enjoying reading that. I meant to read it a long time ago, but I've kind of been doing that lately.
It's amazing that some of that stuff, if you come with a mind that's actually open to truly learn, not just look at it apologetically, it will raise some serious questions. Can I ask, since we're talking about this, and I want to get back to your story in a second, but
sure.
Did you, in your research before you deconverted or even since, did you get into anything just talking about what I would call the origins of the actual text, like some of the verses? Like what I mean is the way that Homer, the Lucan Acts is a rewrite of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and
no, I hadn't really got into any of that. I started learning about, I didn't know I'd never heard that actually, but okay. I started learning about I learned more about the way the Bible was formed, I think, after college. I read Bart Ehrman's books a lot, and that was really informative. I really respected him. I really do still respect him. So, and his books were super helpful to understanding like how the Bible came to be formed, because I just learned about the Bible. I didn't necessarily learn a lot of the history of it. I I didn't really know much about that actually.
Can I ask, and I want to mention one or two more things, but can I ask with what you just said about not knowing a lot about where the Bible came from? Yeah. Did that frustrate or anger you at all as you realized that, obviously there's some people that just, they grew up and they've only just parroted what they've been told, and then they grew up and parroted what they've been told. But there's some people probably in the stories, in the mix somewhere, that knew a little bit more. They knew more than the average Joe, and they knew where this stuff came from, and like that they didn't tell you all the information. Right. Did that ever kind of cross your emotional wavelengths? Is like, oh, that's not right.
I think what made me mad was that like I didn't know this stuff. Like I did for like a short time get frustrated that like my parents raised me as a Christian. Like why, it caused this huge problem in my life. I mean, it ended up causing this incredibly like difficult time in my life. And I wish that I had never been a Christian, because it was just such a horrible thing to have to go through, to fall in love with this God and then to realize, poof, he's not there. Like that's really sad. And not to mention like derailed your entire like life, practically speaking. But I'm getting off track, and I think I forgot what you asked.
Did it make you frustrate you that people didn't really tell you the whole story? Or some people probably knew more than they let on.
I think that's true, and that is like kind of something that makes me angry thinking about it now, because they're being deceptive. Like William Lane Craig was one that I really liked when I was just out of high school, and I really thought he was like really smart and made good points, but he's really disingenuous and he's really insulting to people who don't believe. And and he was insulting to Bart Ehrman. So I was like, all right, I like Bart Ehrman, so now I hate you. You're not nice to Bart Ehrman. Like, come on, man. He's like the nicest guy ever. So I think that there were people like that. I don't think it was ever for me something like my pastor was new and he didn't tell me. So I never felt that way, I don't think. But I feel that way, about people like William Lane Craig, who know better. He knows, but he's playing the part. He likes to be an actor. He likes to try to convince people of things. He's like a defense lawyer, I mean,
and I wonder too if some of them actually, you got to think that some of them actually, even though they're charlatans on one level, they actually like are so deceptive that they maybe have deceived themselves. Like when they explain stuff away, they're explaining it away to themselves even.
I think you're right. And I think I was doing a little bit of that, like in my own way. Like, I think all of us as Christians do this a little bit, because
Yeah.
I was listening to the Bible Answer Man in high school and learning all of these ways to defend my faith.
Hmm.
And
Hank
so when
Hanegraaff.
people would ask me about things, I would explain kind of what I'd heard or what I'd learned. And I think you're right. I think what I was doing in those moments is I was trying to convince myself that my theology was okay.
Yeah.
You know? And one example really quickly was just Hank Hanegraaff, who was the Bible Answer Man back then. He had this is one that just made me cringe. People would ask, like, okay, in one gospel, there was one angel at the tomb, in another gospel, there's two. And his answer was, well, if there were two angels, their first was one. Well, there you go. Problem solved. There's no contradiction. It was so silly. Like, no, one says there's two, one says there's one. Like, so basically he was saying one of the gospels just didn't mention the second angel, just didn't happen to. And I guess that's fine. But like, you're claiming the Bible is like totally perfect. And if you're claiming it's totally perfect and one guy leaves out probably an important detail, then that matters,
Yeah.
And so that made me cringe whenever you'd say that, even as a Christian. And that's one of those questions I didn't want to have to answer. That and the talking snake. I did not like, or the talking donkey. Like, I did not like answering those questions about the Bible. So
It's amazing. Yeah. And I wanted to mention too, just for anyone who didn't know what I was talking about with Homer, and I don't want to belabor this because I'm working on a very big project where I'll go into this in detail.
Oh, cool.
It'll be a while. So just in case anyone wants to start doing some digging, Luke and Acts appears to be in large part a rewrite of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. In addition, it looks like there is a lot of influence from Virgil and who's the other guy? Euripides. In addition to that, there's a lot of like almost to a creepy levels of parallels between Luke and Plutarch. Plutarch wrote parallel lives, and if you look at Plutarch's life, and then you look at what he wrote, and then you look at what we think we know about Luke's life and what he wrote, it looks like someone looked like Plutarch and put him up on a mirror. You know how a mirror will give you the backwards view of it? It's like someone took it and just flipped a few things, but it looks like the same thing. It looks like Plutarch is Luke. I'm not saying he is, I'm saying it looks like it. And
yeah.
You see Pythagoras. Pythagoras is woven directly into John 21, where 153 fish. Bingo. Why would someone say Jesus did this great miracle of all these fish? This is so cool. Instead of going to his feet and saying, let's just be with Jesus because he's so wonderful, let's stop and count the fish and figure out exactly how many there are. Oh, there's exactly 153. Anyone who was a Pythagorean, which we know the Qumran community was highly Pythagorean, and a lot of other groups around there were, the Essenes were highly Pythagorean. 153 is like bing, 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 magic number. You look at Luke in the first chapter or two, the numbers in the beginning of Luke are not random. When it says in the 6th month, Elizabeth did this. And then when you go to the temple, there's this lady named Anna who is 84 years old. Those numbers aren't random. They are Pythagorean. You add them together, you times them by pi, you get a Pythagorean number. They're very specific. Gematria is woven all throughout. And of course, Revelation is gematria on steroids. But you look at this stuff, and then the star stories where the Gospel of Mark is structured according to the symbols of the zodiac in the right order. You're like, oh, snap, this whole thing is so different than I thought.
Yeah, there's a lot of influences. It's like if you just hand someone a Bible and ask them to read it, like they're going to read it at face value. They're going to read it for what they perceive it to be when they read it. But when you learn about the history of the Bible or history at all around that time and the different influences into these cultures, or like, what did they mean when they said such and such in Hebrew or such and such in Greek? Because, the Bible wasn't written in English, which is something that I think, oddly enough, many Christians don't even think about, someone had to translate that. And if, you know anything about languages, like, it's not always like a one-to-one correlation between like a phrase and a meaning behind a phrase in one language compared to the next. And so all these things matter. And the fact that Christians want to just basically not look at that, not pay attention to that, it tells you a lot. They can't look at it for a reason. They either want to keep their Christianity or or they're not facing it because it's too painful. And I get it. It was painful for me. And, for some people, I think maybe they should just stay Christian, because it's not an easy thing to have to go through, I don't think.
With the Bart Ehrman stuff that you researched, was that a shocker, just like learning that there's 40, 50 gospels and 6 different books of Acts and all that?
Yeah, I had learned a little bit about some of these other gospels that had funny stories about Jesus that funny because you'd never heard them before, and you're like, oh, that's weird, So, and then learning about how some of these didn't get into, the early church fathers ended up, not early, but the church fathers in the first couple hundred years started to kind of sort this stuff out. And I learned about the different heresies, and many Christians thought that Jesus had sinned, or whatever. These are things that just essentially got voted on or sorted out between these church leaders. And so I had learned some of that, but learning about all the errors, and all of the mistakes and how some of them became the Bible we have today, that blew me away. Like the woman caught in adultery probably wasn't ever in the Bible. And it's the story that pastors probably right now are preaching about, we're doing this on Sunday. So there's a pastor right now somewhere who's giving the sermon about the woman caught in adultery. And it's not even a Christian story, probably, Christian in the sense of it never happened probably, or if it did, it wasn't in the original Bible. It's just, it's just crazy. So yeah, it blew me away.
One of the crazy things too to me about when you mentioned the phrase original Bible, that, there is no real original Bible. It just, the canon kept on changing. And I've been doing a lot of digging recently. It's been fascinating to me that, and I never knew this, and it kind of makes me angry, but the book of Enoch, have you done much into that yet? Go over that? It is quoted in the New Testament canon 100 times. People think, oh, that's quoted in Jude once or twice. No, it's quoted in the New Testament 100 times. The book of Jubilees is quoted several dozen times. Maccabees is quoted. Tobit is quoted. It's all these books.
And these are the Apocrypha, right?
Apocrypha, all this, the Second Temple.
The Catholic,
Judaism.
These aren't in the conservative evangelical Bible. This is in the Catholic Bible.
Well, some of them are, but I mean, they all predated, the Christian books, and they're clearly because they're woven into our canon. We know that the people who wrote the New Testament appreciate them because they're quoting them. I mean, they're literally they're quoting them at least 100 times. And the Ethiopian church never lost the Book of Enoch. They had it as part of their canon from day one. So you're talking about God seeing millions upon millions upon millions of people in Ethiopia believing in Christ, being told by their pastors and their leadership, Enoch is inspired. For 2,000 years, they never lost it.
Yeah.
And it's well, can't God be clear about which books are his? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think what's really fascinating to me too is the Apocrypha, I think, if I remember right, it existed for the first 1,500 years of Christianity. It was the Bible. Yeah. And so for the last 500 years, Protestants have decided it's not the Bible. And so we don't even know which Bible God likes, which one's his favorite. We don't know, and now there's one that has just Enoch in it I didn't know about. So there's a third one. So that's a third version, they all have different things. And it's if we don't even know which book is his, if we have to trust the word of God, but we don't know which word to trust, we're kind of lost. We need to start thinking more about well, where did these books come from? How do we decide which is the correct book? How do we decide which book should be in the Bible? And that should matter to Christians. And sadly, it doesn't to many Christians, I think.
And Qumran, I think, just as maybe a final note, and I want to get to a few other topics, but Qumran is another issue. Qumran, people are not being told the truth about that. They're just not even studying it. But it's what in the world is Jesus doing quoting the community rule book of the Qumran community? Why would he quote that book? And yet he does. It's
but what's Qumran?
The Dead Sea Scrolls community.
It was in there? Oh, I see.
They have all these books. They have books of the Old Testament that we'd be familiar with. They thought they didn't have Esther. They just found out recently that they did have Esther in there. But they had the Torah certainly. But they had a whole bunch of copies of Enoch, lots and lots of them, heavy on Enoch. These people loved Enoch. They loved their Jubilees and all that. But they had their own books too, like that they would write, where it wasn't, they're saying this is our canon, our Torah, our Enoch, this is our holy books, but we also have our own rule books. We have community rule books. So this is how you will act in the community as a member of Qumran. There's debate if those were Essenes or not, but here at Qumran, you will act this way if you're going to be one of us.
Yeah.
And they had a bunch of different scrolls like that, the war scroll, the community scroll. Like, what's Jesus doing quoting them? Like, I'm like, oh, come on, you guys didn't tell us this is where this stuff came from. I'm like, this is not, it's not right. Like, to me, the issue is to boil it down, is like, if there's a table in front of us, tell people all the information and like give them what they need. Don't give them like 1,000th of the information, and don't tell them about all these other pieces and then say, but believe in Christ. Like, give me everything and I'll make up my own mind, but give me everything first.
Yeah.
Anyway, I know I'm preaching to the choir there, but
no, that's good. It's interesting to hear kind of where your studies have kind of led you, or like what you've researched. It's interesting. Everybody kind of like kind of focuses on different things, and it's just fascinating, I think, to hear about it.
Can I ask you about a totally different part of research? Did you dive into the whole moral atrocities issue of the Old Testament when you were deconverting?
I know it seems silly, like if God was murderous, like that should matter, but for me, I had trouble reconciling the Old Testament God with Jesus because they're very different. But that didn't really stand in my way. It was just really nice when I realized I didn't have to believe in it. Like when I realized that like I could view it as like an allegory or a story that didn't really happen. Then I could kind of say, oh, God wasn't really that monster. Like I don't have to reconcile Jesus and Yahweh. It's okay. Yeah. That was just a tale to tell me a moral truth, so it wasn't really big for me in that way. But
did it become bigger though, like after you deconverted, in terms of just,
I think
because it does say Jesus is God, right? Jesus is God. I'm the Father of one.
One and the same.
And Jesus says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So it's like when Yahweh did that to so-and-so in the Old Testament, that was Jesus doing that to those people.
Yeah, I think what bothers me is knowing that it won't matter to Christians. Like for them, no matter how horrible Yahweh was, murdering people for like the silliest reasons, and like destroying like wanting his people to just annihilate and completely murder everybody in a certain culture just to get rid of them, to show that he's the powerful God. Like that doesn't matter to Christians. And that is what bothers me, is that like, it should, like, if your God is doing those things, I think objectively speaking, if I said that Muhammad did that, Christians would be like, see, Allah is murderous and terrible. We shouldn't believe in Allah. We should believe in Jesus. He's loving. I mean, but if you say it was Yahweh, or if it was really Jesus, in an earlier form, then they find a way to excuse it. So they're not objective about it. And that's what bothers me, just like the dishonesty, or not being truthful with themselves or with others. And I understand why people tell themselves lies. I mean, we all do it to some extent in certain areas of our lives, but it's just, that's what bothers me, is the inconsistencies and not being really honest with the information, I think.
One corollary to that too, I'll add, is just, it's funny to me how when you do deconvert, some of the Christians, one of the questions that they love to go to is, so where do you get your morality from now? And have you had that yet, by the way?
Oh yeah. That's another one that like is irritating, because Christians basically teach you that you can't be moral without God. So if you don't have God, like, why aren't you raping and pillaging?
But that's a good point. Is like you're like, okay, you're right, Mr. Christian, Miss Christian. Now that I see that the Bible was clearly teaching genocide, land theft, slavery, stoning, beating your slaves till they're almost dead, passing human what's the word, where you're buying and selling people, human trafficking, where you can bequeath slaves to different people, you can sell them. The idea that you can rape a girl in the field and then just pay her dad 30 shekels of silver or something like that, and she becomes your wife and she can never leave. you can stone your son if he's, rebellious enough.
Disobeying. Yeah.
Child brides or worse. You kill the moms and the dads and all the people. Any girl that just got married, kill her too. But if the girl hasn't had sex yet, you can keep her. That's a kidnapping situation, which is going to eventually become either a child bride or worse.
Yeah.
Misogyny. It's like you list all this stuff off. Genital mutilation, like God really wants the end of little boys' penises. Come on, and it's like, okay,
Right.
you're right. Now that I see that's what God was like, you're right. I have no way to have morality. I should go back to that. It's like,
Yeah, I
come
know.
on.
Yeah, it's really silly.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, we've strayed a little bit from your story. Can you take us back to, you mentioned your wife. What was her journey like with all this, and take us over the edge as to when you finally kind of admitted to yourself and to the world that you were deconverted, and what was her journey like on the sidelines?
Yeah. So when that moment happened, when she said, "You're not Christian," that was my moment. And then that's when we together were trying to reconcile, like, we're unequally yoked now, as the Bible says. Like, you shouldn't be a Christian married to a non-Christian. That's, and that's something I believed and knew my whole life. And so that was a problem. Like, we knew that was a bad thing. Like, will our marriage survive this? How do we raise our kids? At the time, they were watching VeggieTale Christian videos, and we were praying with them every night and reading them Bible stories. They were also like 2 and 3 years old, so they were super young. But like, this was our family. This was how we lived our life.
Yeah.
So she really was struggling, and she was having a really hard time reconciling with me being, a non-believer. At that time, I wouldn't have said I was an atheist early on, but we had a discussion one time about Muslims. It was about the fact that there were there's a billion. I think this might have been an argument that Sam Harris made, but there was a billion Muslims in the world, and they all believe in Allah. Why would God allow them to be deceived like that? Kind of similar to this Enoch book and the Ethiopians believing it to be God's word, when if it's not, God just allowed them to be tricked for thousands of years. And so for her, this idea that God would create human beings and then allow entire cultures to just be tricked, and just basically because they were born in the Middle East or born in a different part of the world, he just lets them be deceived and doesn't really intervene, because many of them have never heard about Jesus, or through history, Christianity wasn't well known everywhere, so that really bothered her, that could happen, that God would create people basically only to send them to hell for eternal torment because they didn't believe the right thing. So that's kind of where she started to go. And then the thought that she would have to tell her children, our sons, that even if I'm a really loving father and a nice person, that because I didn't believe Jesus is God, that I would forever be in hell and burning for eternity. The thought that she'd have to tell her children that really bothered her. And that didn't make sense to her. And so then I would say within 3 to 4 years after, it might have been 2 to 4 years after I deconverted, she decided that for different reasons, she was also an atheist. So that's kind of how that happened.
That's quite an interesting story.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the part about hell, because that's a big issue for people, just knowing that they technically have to be completely delighting in the Lord someday, as they're in heaven themselves, and raptured by his glory, and totally in their glorified saintly existence, utterly happy, beyond happy, knowing that you are in hell being tortured endlessly. I mean, I know some people will say, well, it's more of an annihilation or whatever, but unless you're going to go that route, if you're going to go the traditional route of this is eternal conscious torment, there's that's a pretty big issue. It's I think people, you were talking about it personally too, but just even what about other people that are that are going to be other religions? Why would it have been better for God to let them exist in the first place. If they're going to be headed to eternal conscious torment, why not just
Right.
keep them from existing so that at least they can have no torture in their future? Like, why is that a better outcome?
Right.
Why is
Yeah.
torture better than non-existence?
It's
I
really
don't.
horrible. And if you're already on Team Jesus, like you will just, your mind won't be changed by any argument. I
Yeah.
mean, you're already bought in, but if someone's objective about that, it makes sense that that would be a problem.
Yeah.
It makes sense that that's an issue, and we should be bothered by that. Like, if that's the rule that you have to believe to go to heaven and not be tormented for eternity, like tortured, then it makes sense that God would say, you know what, knowing that the people here are going to follow a different path, or knowing that that's likely, I think I just won't let those people come into existence. I'll, let the people over here who will find Christianity come into existence, and then they can decide for themselves either way.
Yeah.
But not even giving them the choice. I mean, it's just weird. It doesn't really make sense,
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I was just thinking, one of the things you talked about was just how do you do life together with your wife being unequally yoked at that point. And I know this may not have been part of your story, but just anticipating maybe other people's stories that may be listening.
Sure, yeah.
What kept you from pursuing a divorce? Like, there are probably people where to them that's the only outcome is, there's no way.
Yeah.
Especially if it's an issue of, well, you're going to deceive the children, you're going to lead them to hell, turn them away from Christ, harden their hearts. You are now, enemy number one. You're an agent of Satan, even if it's passively. What would you say kept you all from going down that path, and what advice would you give to someone who's in that situation in terms of things that they should think through?
That's a good question, and I feel really unqualified to answer it, even though I've gone through it. But I'll just say, like, I think for me, I wasn't thinking about that because I was the one who had changed. Like, we got married under a certain understanding that we were both committed Christians, and now I wasn't. So, like, the ball was kind of in her court. So I'd be curious to ask Chrissy, like, what was the thing keeping you around? I mean, honestly, probably because we loved each other. Like, I think that's ultimately why we stayed. But for her, a huge part of it was like, okay, he doesn't believe in like these fundamental things that I believe in anymore, but I still love him. He's still a good father. He's a good person. And now she has to reconcile that person and that relationship with theology that says you should not be with that person, and so at the end of the day, she, that's how she kind of started thinking about, like, well, how will I tell my children that their dad's gonna go to hell and be tormented for eternity? Like, how can I tell them that?
Yeah.
And then that's kind of what made her start to believe that, Christianity wasn't true, and that's what kept us together. Advice for other people, I think, like, every marriage is different and every situation has a lot of different variables involved. So I think depending on what the other circumstances are, it could very well change the outcome, because there are many atheists like yourself who still are married to believers. And that's good. I think if that works for the couple, I think that's good. But in some circumstances, maybe the Christianity was the only thing holding the marriage together, and maybe it is best to go separate ways. But whenever there are children involved, that's so much more complicated to me. Because, like, it would break my heart, the thought that I would have divorced my wife when my children were 2 and 3 years old, simply because we didn't have the same opinions on one issue.
Yeah.
I mean, the thought that would be something that would like split a family is sad to me. And so I think that motivated me to not want to go anywhere. I loved my wife and I loved my kids, and I didn't want to live separately from them. I didn't want to, I know. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'd say, I think.
Yeah. Two questions for you about that. And I could keep on throwing two questions at once. It's a theme of this interview, but
No problem.
How long was it between your deconversion and it being at least known to her, and maybe even known to the public, but between when you deconverted and she realized that was where you had gone, and when she deconverted, like how much time passed, and then were you blamed by other people for her deconversion? Like, wow, you poisoned that well.
Um, maybe. Christians didn't really talk to us after that. That's what's really sad, is it happens to so many people. Like the Christian friends that they had didn't stick around. Like, this idea that Christians, when you're suffering or when you go through a drought in your faith or walk with God, will be there for you, is not often true. They don't know how to handle someone not being a Christian. Like, wondering why God didn't answer your prayer, they can be there for you during that. They'll just say to have more faith and that they care about you, and to come to them anytime that, you need to talk. But if you say, I don't believe that Christianity is true, I don't think God's real, they don't know how to be a friend to you in that way. And so there weren't people around us saying like, you're leading Chrissy astray or whatever. But I deconverted and it was May of 2005. And then it was about 2007 or 2008 that she finally it was funny because for her, it was like kind of this nonchalant thing. One day she was just kind of like, yeah, I think I'm an atheist too. It's like, what? That's a big deal. Like, like, how can you just like say that, but she had kind of been processing this all and then kind of explained, what I explained to you for her were her reasons. And so it took a few years for her to kind of work through that, I think. And not that everyone should follow that path. I'm not saying that that's like ideal or that that's what other people should do or anything. This is just the path that we took,
Yeah. That's interesting. You bring up a really good point, and I just want to take a quick side shot on this of the idea of other people's responses to us. Like whether we're talking about a spouse to a deconverted spouse or to the broader community, like one of the things that I really expected is this idea of people wanting to win you back to Christ. Not that I would have gone back to Christ. I didn't leave because people were mean to me or something, and I wouldn't have come back to Christ because people were so loving. But in the sense of, there's a passage, I forget where it is, I should know this, but where it talks about, if your unbelieving spouse, if your spouse isn't a believer, you can redeem them and live for Christ and win them back by your good behavior. Jesus talks, I think it's Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who's in heaven. Like they will see it. So I was just thinking, like, okay, for a spouse, like, all right, you just deconverted. The spouse that's left is going to be like, I am going to make you the best spouse possible. Like, I'm going to be sweeter than ever. You're going to have the more sex and the best sex in your life. I'm going to, have the best tone towards you, the best attitude. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt more than ever. I'm just going to shine grace at you in every sense. I'm going to bless your socks off. Or the bigger community, like, look, we know that you can't see it yet, but you need the gospel. We can't preach it to you because you don't have ears to hear, but we're going to live it for you. We're going to live the gospel. You're going to feel the love, whether you like it or not. It's just going to ooze from you, and it's going to be irresistible. To go back to Calvinism, it's going to be irresistible. You will want this gospel because you'll see the love. It will just suck you in. It's so good. And it's like, that's not what happens to most people. Most people, they'll give you like a little bit of time, like, okay, what's going on? This is weird. What do you mean you're not a Christian? Like, what's this weird thing? But then it's like, okay, you've actually taken a stand. You've planted your flag. You are not a Christian, and you have publicly stated basically what they would say is blasphemy. Jesus is not God. There is no virgin birth. There is no resurrection. The Bible's a man-made book. All the stuff that we would say, we are true heretics in their sense. There is no salvation through Christ because there is no Christ. There's no man living up in space, up in heaven. It's not real. You're not going anywhere when you die. It is total, utter blasphemy. And you plant that flag, and it's like because you become an agent of Satan, now you're the enemy. And the enemy is someone that you want to ever so slightly send messages like you ready yet to come back to Christ? You ready yet? But like if you don't show signs of a softening of your heart, it's like, you are the enemy. We have to fight you. We have to shun you, because especially for the sake of the children, we can't let those bad messages of falsehood get into their little heads. They need to know the earth is 6,000 years old. They need to know Jesus' blood will save them. You're trying to say, no, that's not true. that can't happen. So the shelter has to go up.
Yeah, it's funny.
Especially snarky shelter. I should, you know.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to people about these things I was processing when I was going through them so bad, and like nobody. I think it's not like I was going out and like shouting from the mountaintops, like, please, somebody talk to me. You know, there were a few conversations I had with like one guy that I was going to college with, and we would talk a little bit about it. Like he kind of inadvertently found out. He was the first person other than Chrissy that knew. And that I was like terrified because someone knew. And I was still in Bible college. I still had one more year to go. um, so, um, so he and I would talk about things, but at that time I was very like, you know, like you're terrified, I think, in that time of your life, because you don't really know what you believe now. You've decided what you don't believe, but you don't know what's my moral compass now. Like, how do I decide what's right and wrong in life? Like, you've been told the Bible, you've lived in this Bible like bubble, you know, your whole life, this Christian bubble, and you get out and now it's like, well, I don't know how to do anything. I don't know how to think. I don't know how to be moral. I don't know how to make decisions, because all of that came with the package of Christianity. God makes the decisions. God decides what's right and wrong. You just listen and do what he says. Now I have to figure it out on my own. The really beautiful thing is when you become an atheist or a non-believer or an agnostic, you realize that you've been deciding those things all along. Like you've always been getting through life with your own skills and your own strengths. You thought it was God. It wasn't. It was you. You're strong enough to do this, you know, to be able to. And that was very empowering to have those thoughts of I'll be okay. Like I thought it was God that was helping me all this time, but really I got through this with the support of friends and family. You know, we get through difficult times in our lives, not on our own, but like God wasn't there, and that's okay. Like we were, we'll be able to get through it. So
that's a great insight. I like that.
Yeah. That's something that I think really kind of made me feel good, you know, after leaving. But yeah, there weren't many people that I could talk to about it. And then like my parents talked to me. My dad talked to me like maybe once or twice, and then my mom a few times, just a handful of times, very briefly. And she's very sensitive to that. So like, you know, we can't talk about it really. And my one of my sisters talks to me occasionally by text. She'll ask me a question or two about what I think about something spiritual or religious. And then my other sister, I think, is quite upset by it all. So we don't really talk about it, but we're on good terms otherwise. I think all of us, we kind of unite under the things like, you know, family stuff, you know. So we're able to keep our relationships intact outside of Christianity.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's the goal. Hope.
Yeah.
A lot of us don't have
Not that it's perfect. Yeah, but
yeah, that's certainly a big goal.
Yeah.
I love how you described the idea of realizing that you were doing these things all along. Like one of the things I point out to people a lot in my chats with people, and I think it's true, is it takes a lot of bravery to kind of turn the truisms of Christianity on their head. For example, to say where it says in Proverbs, you know, don't trust in your own understanding, but, you know, trust in the Lord. Lean not on your own understanding, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and all that stuff. You know, your understanding is so depraved. You are short-sighted. God can see everything. He has a bigger plan. His ways are not our ways. His ways are higher than ours. And just this idea of saying, I can't trust myself. And even in the faith context, like with, you know, doubting Thomas, like blessed are those who have believed even though they haven't seen the proof. Like just trust God, have faith. And the bravery to turn it and say, no, I want to see proof first. I want to see evidence. I believe doubt is the virtue, and blind faith is not a virtue anymore. And that it feels so like you're like, you know, almost like you're giving God the middle finger, like, no, I'm not doing this way. I'm not going to obey this way. It feels rebellious in some senses, but you're like, I have to know that this is real because this doesn't feel real anymore. And it feels like it's bravery, but then it eventually becomes, like you're saying, it becomes actually what you've been doing all along. Like when you say, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding, you realize you're not kind of saying, no, don't trust in the Lord, trust in you. You're saying, you've always been trusting in you. You just didn't know it. So
Yeah,
it's like it
exactly.
switches from bravery to realizing you're not being brave. You're just doing what you've always been doing without knowing it, without having the right construct of how to interpret it. But
Yeah.
it takes
Yeah.
the bravery step is still important in that.
It's like, I mean, when you're describing God, it's like so much sounds like an abusive spouse or abusive relationship. Like you can't trust yourself. You need to trust me. I know
Yeah.
best. Um, and and there's many other like ways in which God kind of comes off that way, like an abusive relationship. But
Very much so.
it's just so, yeah. But something I've shared with a few people that I think is so cool is my wife had heard somewhere before someone had talked about how some feminists have kind of viewed Eve as kind of this hero that, like, instead of being like the disobedient, the first human to disobey God, like God said, don't do something, and she did it and she disobeyed. And now, because of her sinful and bad nature, now not only did she suffer, but all of humanity forever suffers because of her. They see it more like the way that they reframed it, like you talked about, like turning it on its head. Like, she was like seeking knowledge, she was seeking truth,
Mm.
and it was in the face, like in the face of tyranny. You know what I mean? Like, God was the tyrant. Like, I'll tell you what to do. I'll tell you what you can and can't do. And you don't know everything, but it's for your own good. And don't you ever try to find out. And yet Eve, despite this, she cared about understanding and knowledge and learning enough that she went and she took that apple, and she then had more understanding. Like, she's kind of like this hero that, like, defied tyranny. I just think that's kind of a cool, I like that take on it.
It's interesting. It reminds me of there's some ways in which Judas has been described as the hero. I'll save that story for another day, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
The Eden story reminds me too, just of the real simple context of, like, why in the world would we? I don't know Eden. I'm not saying this as if Eden was real, and ignoring the copying that happened from other religions, ignoring Lilith, all that stuff. Just a straight up simple reading of Adam and Eve. Why would God, if there was a God, why would he take two people that are completely naive and innocent, like babies, almost little toddlers, in terms of their naivety to the world, put them in a garden with, number one, the enemy of their souls, a snake, and number two, why would you say to them, hey, there's, the one rule of this place is don't touch the wet paint. By the way, there's this really shiny room over there with wet paint everywhere. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
Like, what God would do that? What parent would do that? Wouldn't you say,
right.
hey, if I'm gonna give you a garden, I'm gonna give you a safe garden. I'm not gonna give you the garden that's gonna terrify your soul, and it's gonna be the biggest conundrum of your existence.
Yeah.
Like there will be no snakes, there'll be no enemies there, and there will be nothing to touch and destroy your soul.
Yeah,
it will be a safe place. And then what God would say, oops, you made one mistake, I absolutely banish you and you will die. Like, what parent would say such a thing without being, as you said, abusive? And it's amazing the stories that it's a total setup. You're set up to fail. And if it hadn't been them, the next generation would have easily failed. Somebody would have failed. Yeah. And it's like we take these stories, we can't see how abusive they are because we're so used to them, especially like Noah, Noah and the flood. That's probably the bigger one in one sense. Like, okay, so God says, a few of you did some bad things, so I'm going to kill everybody, including the little babies that were just born yesterday. You're all going to die. Like, just, it doesn't make any sense. Your God is a psychopath, and they can't see, like, no, you're twisting it. You're twisting it. It's like, once you get out, you're like, you know what? I wasn't twisting it. He's a psychopath.
Yeah. It's terrible. I mean, I think, you reminded me of like this. I saw when I was at college, there was a painting of Noah, of the flood, and there's these people like underwater, like, and like clinging to rocks. And then, like, what about the squirrels? Like, they had nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
Not just squirrels. I don't have they're not my favorite animal. I just thought like a random animal, like a squirrel or a deer. Like, these poor animals were like drowned to death because God was pissed off at people,
I always like to imagine like Noah, with the people in the rocks, drowning. Noah shouting from his little window, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life.
Right.
Come on.
Right. And where's the forgiveness there? When
the
people are like, okay, I see the wrong I've done, I'm ready to, like,
Speaking of forgiveness, could I ask, did it, as you deconverted, did the whole issue of the blood magic kind of shake you up a little bit, that you actually believed in blood magic?
It didn't shake me up. It just was like, oh, that's creepy when you think of it as like blood must be sacrificed for me to be appeased,
Yeah.
for God to be appeased. Yeah, that's just creepy and weird now. But it didn't shake me up that I believed in it. But there are a lot of parallels to like cultic ideas and the way some Christian rituals,
Yeah.
So I think that's true.
It really it shocked me that it didn't stand out earlier. Like, it's like, number one,
Yeah.
apart, I mean, not, yes, the gore of it, like, all these people, slitting animals' throats purely for the sake of the glory of God and the forgiveness, and then God loves
Right.
the aroma of the burning meat.
Flesh.
But
Yeah.
like why is blood so magic? Like, and the bigger picture, why can't God just say, I just forgive you? Like, why does this have
Right.
to be like in a C.S. Lewis Narnia sense? Like, why does this have to be the magic from before the dawn of time? Why can't God just say, I will just forgive you? Oh, Adam and Eve, you ate the apple. You know what? I told you not to. You learned a good lesson here. I'm kind of disappointed, but you know what? I forgive you. End of
Yeah.
story. Grace upon grace. Why does it have to be
Yeah.
blood? And it just,
That's yeah. That seems to be the more Christian message, is just to forgive. That's what God asks us to do with others, not to like anymore go sacrifice an animal and then the other person's okay.
yeah,
Like, yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's like if someone does something that hurts your feelings, like the way to make it better is not to go kill an animal. Like that doesn't make any logical sense to me. Or to any of us, I don't think. But
yeah.
yeah, it's kind of
Yeah,
weird.
it's hard. And I think too, just to wrap up that part of the question is,
Uh-huh.
when you say to somebody something like, which I would say now, Christianity was uh, basically a Jewish mystery cult, heavily influenced by the Greco-Roman world, borrowing from other religions, but it was a Jewish mystery cult focused on blood magic and scapegoating and human sacrifice. Eat my flesh, drink my blood. You say that to someone and like, it's just, that's not what it's about. And you're like, no, it is. It's a blood magic, scapegoating, human sacrifice mystery cult. And people just cannot wrap their minds around it. They're like, oh, Scientology is so weird. Even if you're, evangelical, Mormonism's so weird. It's like, if
So
until
is
you get over blood magic, nothing, Scientology is no more weird than your evangelical Christianity. It's not.
right.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
could I ask, one of the issues I like to ask a lot about, and people, it's become pretty big topic these days, is the idea of the healing from religious trauma.
Mm,
Could I ask you, did you feel like there was any trauma, um, not necessarily that any individual per se was,
traumatizing me.
traumatizing you, but just that the ideas were traumatizing you? And how did you, if there was anything that you felt like you had to heal through, how did you go about healing from any trauma and just becoming, what we might call healthy, taking as much of the toxic stuff away, and just being happy in your own skin again? Like, how did that
Yeah.
transpire for you?
Very good question. And I think it's really important too, because it's not easy to get there sometimes. At least for me, it wasn't.
Yeah.
At first, it was praying. Like I had depended on praying to be able to like work through problems. Like if there's anything going wrong or anything I was a little anxious about or anything I was happy about, like any strong human emotion I had, like if I was by myself, it was thanking God for something good, asking God for help with something I was struggling with, or just sharing with God what I had done. Like he was the best friend. So losing that pen pal, like that best friend who like you relied on for everything, who was also a parent figure, just losing them, that's a huge loss. And you mourn that loss, like, because
Mm.
it's just like a death, like that relationship's no longer in your life. And
And
it might sound,
arguably even
yeah,
bigger than a loss of, like, if you lose your parent, you're going to see him again in heaven in your mind. You lose
right.
God, you lost a lot more than the parent.
Right. He's gone forever and he was your everything, you know? So that was really hard at first, especially the, um, learning like how do I describe to people what my morals are? Like how do I tell someone like, well, I'm not going to murder because I don't want to. Yeah, but I mean, if you don't have God to tell you it's wrong, like why, that explaining all that's been tricky, and like trying to like understand like like why do I believe that, things are right or things are wrong? Like sorting through all of that, having to think for yourself and then like kind of reorient yourself and figure out who you are as a person, what you believe, what your likes and dislikes are, instead of following God's will and trying to be a pastor, like being able to step back and say, well, what do I enjoy? You know, that takes a long time.
That's a
It
good
takes a
point.
long time to figure out. The biggest trauma for me was something that I still think I have like some residual like issues with, and it's not as bad as it was. But when I was in college and I was processing all of this, I've talked about this a little bit before, but I was having like issues where the best way I could describe it is like my mind would go blank in the middle of talking about something. So sometimes I would raise my hand in class and I would have, you know, like, oh, I really am curious about this, you know, certain thing. And then they would call on me and like, it's like an etch a sketch. My mind would just erase and I would not have the faintest clue what I was going to ask about. And there were times I was in the middle of discussing things with people at work and that would happen. And I feel like my brain was short circuiting. It was just like the wiring was just like, you know, wigging out or something. And it was so embarrassing. And I was terrified to speak in class. I was terrified to speak up at meetings at work in the years subsequent, you know, to that. And it took years for that to get better. I was having problems concentrating, and then depression was setting in, and I was having issues with depression that I wasn't handling well, I don't think. Those were some of the biggest impacts on my life, were the mental health issues, and then just not being able to like think, like cognitive problems, like practically speaking, not being able to like carry on a conversation because my mind won't work. You know, that sometimes I'll lose track of what I'm saying from time to time, and that still feels like a little bit of the residual leftovers from that time. I think that's one of the worst things.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Did you deal much with kind of dealing with any residuals from the shame? Just, I mean, I know for me, for example, you know, just realizing that, you know, we're obviously very sexual creatures, but that we feel very, very much like we want to be obviously connected, and we want to be, you know, in intimate relationships, but even just the sense of we want to be erotic. We want, you know, to dive into those desires. For a lot of people, that is just, it's not, I mean, even people that are still Christians, I should say, bigger context, they get married and they still feel like they have a tough time, even in a Christian marriage, being erotic, because they feel like there's been so much, you know, purity culture and you should be ashamed of your desires. Suddenly, let's flip a switch, and suddenly you're a lady a lady in public, but a hooker in bed. Like, no, I'm not a hooker in bed. I'm not. I'm going to be a lady. I'm going to be prim and proper. Like that, you can't flip that switch. And so people struggle with that. But then you take away the God stuff, and you're like, huh, this has a bunch of implications. And I don't want to go into all of them here, but like, there's a bunch of implications to realizing there is no such thing as sin. Sin doesn't exist. It's a construct.
Right.
So like, did
so
that,
then right and wrong yeah, go ahead.
it becomes different. I guess not as much to go down the road of what does that imply that you can now do or not do, but just in terms of just the healing from past feelings of shame. Like, did you have much that you had to think through to say, you know what, all those times I, you know, looked at something I shouldn't have, or I, you know, thought something I shouldn't have.
It was never wrong in the first
place.
It was just normal curiosity, normal adolescence, normal humanity. I mean, yeah, I agree with you. Like, I think that like sexuality and that type of thing is just a part of humanity, and it's not right and it's not wrong. In fact, it's actually fairly healthy to, you know, it's probably unhealthy to not have, you know, feelings like that. And so it was definitely a process of like rethinking everything. One of the first things I rethought was homosexuality, like, which being gay, you know, we always called it homosexuality, but just rereading the Bible and deciding like, I could say like, I don't agree with Paul. I don't like that he, you know, what he says here about homosexuality or whatever. But then as an atheist, being able to just go, I don't care, like what Paul says.
Yeah.
And starting to rethink the gay people in my life that I know, and starting to think about them and go like, so what if that's okay? Like, I don't have religion telling me it's wrong anymore. So if I think about the people in my life who I used to think, oh, they're, you know, if they're gay, they're sinning and that's terrible. And oh my gosh. But now it's just like, well, are they happy? Do they seem to be like more comfortable with themselves? And are they hurting anyone? You know, you start asking like actual moral questions that lead you toward like what's actually ethical. And I think things become much more clear, and there's more of an easy way to understand what's right and wrong. Like, is someone being hurt? Are you being hurt by it? Are you dependent on it? Can you, whatever the thing is, whether, you know, whatever you're doing in life, you know, if you're having a drink, or if you're in a relationship, or if you're, you know, whatever you're doing, like, just ask yourself those questions. And that's kind of how ethics are formed. And, you know, I don't know. Yeah. So,
Yeah, makes sense.
I think it's just a process working through all that.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I didn't hang on to it too long, but.
gotcha. Well, I know I've asked a lot of questions. I wanted to kind of ask one final question, then also kind of leave it open at the end for you to kind of also just mention anything that's on your heart that, you know, I didn't maybe think to ask. But so my question before I give you the open mic, so to speak,
Sure.
the afterlife. A lot of people struggle with the implications. I know for me, I was here some 18, 20 months ago at this very computer. This is Saturday, and it just hit me. I've been studying these things in depth for about 18 months, and it was like someone strapped me down in front of a fire hydrant and opened that valve, and I mean, it just flooded in, and I was like, oh shoot, I don't think this is real. I was like, I was talking to myself like, Tim, this isn't real, is it? I was like, no, it's not real. This has never been real, has it? No, it hasn't. And I was like, oh shoot, what does that mean? Like, the Bible's not from a God, it's not divine. Oh shoot, there's no afterlife, there's no heaven, there's no hell. Oh shoot, evolution might be real. How did we get here? I don't know, maybe it is evolution. And it was like all these ramifications, and you know, sin isn't real. Like, it's a construct we made up.
Yeah.
And it hit me, and within an hour I was fully deconverted. I mean, it was probably less than an hour, but I sat
Wow.
kind of stunned at this computer for, I
You
didn't move
had a
for,
moment.
yeah, I didn't
Like
move for
it
about an
was,
hour. Yeah, it was that hour. It was literally like, it was like
that's
right
insane.
before lunchtime or something that Saturday, end of September 2019. And I was just like absolutely stunned, like as if someone had literally, like, you know, those, did you ever see what was it, I think it was The Sixth Sense, the movie where Bruce Willis is the dead guy and all that. You know,
Yeah.
I see the people, and there's this one scene where the little boy has found the video of this mother that had been poisoning the daughter, and you know, everyone's at the funeral, but the little boy knows where the secret VHS tape is, and he puts it on the VCR at the funeral, and the dad's watching it, and his jaw just drops, like, my wife was the one poisoning her, and like his whole world is turned upside down, and he just sits there stunned, speechless, like, and it was like that, like, oh my goodness, this isn't real. And there's so many, you know, all the engines are firing at that point, all cylinders are firing. You're like, there is a lot that I have to unpack, and you kind of like, you feel like you're unpacking it quickly, but then you give yourself the space to be like, okay, you don't have to unpack this quickly. Unpack it slowly. There's plenty of time. Think it through. Do it healthily. You don't have to rush. But it is like a rush. Like, oh my goodness, it feels like
Yeah.
you're like in the
It's
Matrix
exciting
when,
because you've uncovered something huge.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
it's like all the pieces that you finally, like, you didn't know you were deconverting. It suddenly is like, it's like, bam, I am deconverted. And it was like, it reminded me of that Matrix scene where they teach him jujitsu and they stick the metal piece in the back of his head. And like in 10 seconds, he knows jujitsu. And he like, when they turn off the program, he's like, whoa, like, you just downloaded jujitsu into my head. Like, I was like, whoa, I just deconverted from Christianity. It's over. Like, it's fully over.
That's really remarkable.
I
The way
couldn't go
that
back if I
happened for
tried
you.
to. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was an
me
amazing
either.
time. But like,
Yeah.
one of the big implications I meant to ask about is the afterlife. Like,
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to have, I'm not going to see Jesus. I'm not seeing God.
Right.
I'm not having a mansion. I'm not seeing loved ones, whether I go first or they do. There's no hell. So all the things about, you know, let's at least hope that the Hitlers are burning in hell. That's not happening.
Yeah.
Whether you're a good person or a bad person, there's no hell for people. I'm not going anywhere. And when I die, I turn back into dust. There's no rewards. I can be the best person ever. And when it's over, there's no trophy at the end. I don't get applauded at the end.
Right.
You just die.
Right.
That
Yeah.
is so painful for some people, not everybody. Some
Oh,
people
yeah.
have said, I didn't want to live forever anyway. I'm not that person. I wanted to live forever. How did you deal with that?
I love that you said it that way. I feel the same way you do. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because I feel the same way, but it sounds so funny when you like, I wanted to live forever, you know, like, but what you meant and what I would say I felt like was, like, there's just something about me, like assuming I was healthy, assuming, yeah, assuming I was healthy and that my loved ones wouldn't die either, I would love to live forever. I'd be fascinated. I like history, so I would be fascinated to see how humans progress. I
Yeah.
love like the idea that I could see like how things develop and like, you could make new friends and like as long as you didn't age, right? Then things would like, well, you make new friends either way. But if you age, things it's different. Like if you're getting older and slower, but you just never die, and then you end up being like miserable and you can't move and you're in pain. Like living forever in that state, not good. Um, but yeah, I always felt like you did, like it would be wonderful to just see to just like the good things about life is what we want to continue to enjoy. Um,
Hmm.
and so I did have a hard time processing it at first because heaven is this like it's this it's a fantasy, but it's this perfect ending. It's the happy ending that we all want.
Yeah.
Like we all want it to happen really, really bad. And that's one that like I'm still processing because it's hard to accept that like that if you've been told all your life that like not only does it not end, but it gets better. And then you're told not only does it not get better, it ends.
Yeah.
Like that's a really hard reality to accept. And I think it's one that and the fear of hell that keeps several, like many, well, Christians I know, but many people in the faith that it's hard to accept something bad. It's hard to accept such a sad ending.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is I'm raising two kids who don't remember anything about Christianity and they don't consider themselves religious. So one of
Kudos
them
to you.
says he's an atheist. The other one's like, I don't know. I don't really care. And
Ambivalence at its
they,
finest.
yeah, what?
Ambivalence at its finest.
Yeah, he's also a teenager. Like, but but they don't have like existential crises over this. Like they don't like pain themselves like I do over like, oh my gosh, like well, what's the purpose of it all then? And like, and I think it's also a personality thing, but
Yeah.
I think what I've realized is that like I'm not trying to sound like insulting here, but like it's a fantasy. So like we were taught something that was pretend. So trying to be okay with reality, it's hard, but like that is impossible. Like the idea that like you could live forever, it's impossible. And not if you were to live forever, it's not the only thing that we would want. We would want to live forever in perfect health. We would want to live forever with no like deterioration in our skills or in our abilities. But if we lived forever, like the people that were really good at their jobs, like the CEOs and like the authors and the athletes, they'd never stop doing what they're doing. And we'd never get a chance to develop in our life. Like it would be kind of a problem, and also I think like there's no way to measure, well, in that sense, like, I don't know, people have said this and it's hard for me, but to process, but they'll say like, if we didn't have death, if it didn't end, like life wouldn't mean anything. And I know that that's kind of hard to absorb, I think, but in a way it's like, I don't know, in a way it's true. What do you think of that? Like if like when people say something like, well, if it went on forever, like life wouldn't mean anything, if there wasn't death.
I am more of the optimist side of that. I'm like, remember the Narnia series at the end? It says, this is only the beginning of the end, and something like that. And it says every chapter is going to get better than the next. This book basically will never end, and every chapter will get better. You'll think you finally reached the pinnacle, and you realize, again, the story's only begun. It's like, it's like looking for this amazing hidden country. When you realize you're there, you realize it's only a stepping stone to the actual real country. And when you get to that real country, you realize that's only a stepping stone to the better. And it's like this bigger and bigger buildup that never ends. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
I would have wanted to do it. I think I've got what they call like a Renaissance mind, where I would be happy to spend my eternity in a library reading books. I love learning. And so you think, okay, well, after you've spent, a quadrillion, trillion years reading books, you're all done now. I'm a photographer. Okay, go do
Right.
photography, till the nth degree. Okay, well, I
Yeah.
love people. Okay, well, go party it up for another trillion years with everybody you can. Well, I
Yeah.
also love to, this and that. I couldn't stop doing stuff. I would never get bored. I'm never bored. There's not a moment in my life that I've ever been bored. Even if I'm sitting in a boring conference, my mind is just,
Yeah.
I'm never a bored person. It's never happened to me. And so,
Yeah. You're like the little kid who doesn't want to go to bed because he wants to keep playing.
exactly,
Right.
exactly. Well, it's funny. So I actually I had severe insomnia for 25 years.
Oh,
I
wow.
fortunately moved to Georgia here from Pennsylvania for a very special doctor who cured it in 1 month with no medicine. It was amazing.
Oh, that's
But that's a
cool.
story for another day. But
Yeah.
I did just want to comment though on something you're alluding to,
Mhm.
and I know I do want to leave it for you to kind of have a final open mic for anything
Sure.
that's on your heart. But one of the things that what you're saying makes me think about is I'm going to step back from the heaven question for 1 second.
Yeah.
When you are talking about sexual purity, right? One of the things that they would say, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is one of the issues with pornography is that it sets you up for wanting the pretend more than the real. So in other words, you could say, okay, in real life, you get married and your wife may look really beautiful on your wedding day, but then, maybe if you've done the purity thing, you've never seen her, she gets undressed and she's got a wart there, she's got a this, that, she's not perfect, she's a little bit this. You're like, okay, she's not quite perfect, but this is amazing. You look down the road 10, 20 years, she's had kids, breasts are sagging, she's not perfect. You're certainly heavier than, you're not pressing her anymore. You're heavier. You've got warts growing. You got aging thing. And you're like, okay, so this is reality. Reality is
Right.
we don't look perfect. And
Right.
so they would say, well, you look at pornography and you're going to have this idealized version of every woman's always going to be this and that. She's always going to have a beautiful body in every sense.
And
She's
always
always
be
going to be
willing to
always ready.
always
Yeah.
energized, never
Always
gets tired.
energized.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, it's going to be perfect. And so they would say, one of the issues is you get so used to the pretend world that when you finally get to the real world, it seems less appealing. And it's like, it shouldn't. This woman that is as beautiful as can be with all of her flaws, she's amazing still, an amazing creature.
Yeah.
She should delight you, but she doesn't because you're focused on the pretend world. And if you take the pretend
Yeah.
enough away and you push it away, you just focus on the real world, you will learn to love it exactly as it is with all of its flaws and warts and all this.
Yeah.
And you'd hope that a mature man, a healthy man would say, yes, I love my wife just as she is. I know she's going to age and she's going to know I'm going to age. And we're going to have ways in which we don't look so great all the time. And I can love you just the way you are.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so let's take that to heaven. Heaven is this idealized version of the real world. Yes, it's cool to have fantasies. We love Star Wars. We love this and that. We love to go to other places in our minds. But it's like, if the fantasy is so big that when you finally get to your real world, to your real wife, that you're like, I'm not that excited anymore. I'm not that interested.
Yeah.
You've screwed yourself. You've shot yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
Like, why not embrace reality? And it's like, and the thing that's weird to me is that Christianity also, it mixes in some beautiful stuff like, oh, heavens, no sorrow, no pain, no tears. You're going to shine like you're going to see Jesus if you like him, and you're going to shine in
Yeah.
your glorious body. But it also has this picture of this psychopathic God that we talked about earlier. So it's like you really want to have this spiritual porn, so to speak, where this psychopathic God becomes your all in all. Like, you want a God that truly creates people for the specific purpose of burning them, and according to Romans 9, they become fuel for the fire of his glory in hell. Like, you really want to worship that God. Like, that's a weird, it's kind of like a kinky porn. Like, you want this great heaven, but the heaven with a really psycho God. But it's like, even if you ignore the psycho God, like, heaven is so cool. Yeah, it's a cool story. I love it. I love the story of heaven. I would have loved to have gone there personally, apart from the
Yeah.
psycho God stuff. But it's
Yeah.
like, you have to at some point get back to real life and say, my wife has flaws just like I do, and she is wonderful just the way she is. And this life
Right.
is not, this earth is fragile, and this universe, we don't know what's going to happen, a few generations from now
Yeah.
with this world. And just to say, you know what, I love my life. I love my world exactly as it is, and I'm going to do my best to just leave it better than I found it. I'm going to make a
Yeah.
difference with the years I've been given, and that's your reality. if heaven is the porn that takes me from reality, as much as I would have wanted it and wanted so much to be, spiritually masturbating to that porn, like at some point you have to say, enough. I want reality. I want to love what's real. And I want to embrace as many real things as Matt Honey would say, I think,
Yeah.
and take away as many false things as possible, even if
Yeah.
that's a painful exchange. And I feel bad for people that that really hurts. It's like a real what's the word you'd say when people
It's
are
a
getting off of
huge
drugs? Like a
withdrawal.
detox or withdrawal. Yeah,
Withdrawal symptoms.
withdrawal.
Yeah,
And
real detox. Yeah.
yeah, it's like that's what's happening, and it's hard. It's hard work.
It's why I'm trying to think of how to word this, but like it's why delusions are bad. Like it's why Christianity and religion is bad. It's why like people think, well, Christianity makes the world a better place. But like in this way, it really makes it worse because you have people going around like believing in and putting their hope in something that literally is not there. Like hoping that like their relationships be better in heaven, or like who cares what happens to the earth because like God will renew it.
Yes, that's a scary one.
Yeah. And just believing that like no matter the bad things that happen to them, like many Christians have lived their life looking toward heaven the whole time and like hoping in that, you know what I mean? Not that they didn't try to make their lives better in real life, but like it's like they focus on the delusion so much that they're not living their life the way that they should in a healthy way. It's why when I was a child and I wanted to be a professional football player, which was a delusion, innocent, but like it's what made it so painful to realize this isn't reality. Like becoming, a star actor or becoming, president of the United States or president of some country. Like if those are your goals as a kid, like it's okay to strive for those things, but like the society or the culture feeding you a belief that you absolutely could do it. And then even if they're not, and you just buy into a delusion, whether it be, being some superstar actor or whether it be believing that everything will be made better someday, it's not good because at some point you will have to face reality. At some point, some people don't, they just live a delusion, but at some point you'll have to face that reality. You'll have to come to grips with like a loved one has died, like they're gone, and you're going to have to cope with that. And when you do get to that point, it's incredibly hard and it's incredibly harmful to you, or it can be incredibly harmful to you when it could have been prevented in the first place. If someone in your life, or if you personally had tried to basically learn to be okay with reality. Like you were saying, I think it's a really interesting analogy between like porn and heaven. You get so fixated on something that doesn't exist. Like as great as heaven sounds, it's literally impossible. So the sooner we come to grips with that and start embracing life and the world for what it is, the happier we'll be. And I think the happier everyone will be. And that's why I'm happy for my kids. They're not going to have to grow up believing a delusion. They get to start from scratch and they get to build from there instead of undoing all the garbage and then starting to build, which is what you and I have had to do. Had to undo a lot and to just start at baseline, So yeah, I think that's true. And then you said something about like, I think what makes something enjoyable in reality is that sometimes it is because it's difficult. Like if love means something because it's hard, like if it was perfect and we never had any problems, like in heaven, like if relationships won't matter because you'll love everybody and it won't be hard to love them. Everyone's going to be perfect. It also will be really boring. If like everything's perfect all the time and you're perfectly happy all the time, it's almost like being high constantly. Like you're never you're just constantly like in a state of like everything's great.
Like you're drugged.
Yeah, but you're also not in your right mind, and you're also like I don't know. I'm kind of getting off track, but anyway,
That's
I
a
don't
good
know.
point.
I think I'm still processing all of
Well, it brings to
like,
light too the idea that it is an
I don't
addiction.
know.
I mean, heaven is an addiction of not just heaven, but Christianity is an addiction. Even like just in the generic sense of like if you say to your kids, "Hey, sweetie, you did a great job drawing that painting, that picture with the crayons," they're going to say, "Oh, that feels good. My daddy said I did a good job." And you say it again the next day, "Oh, sweetie, good job drawing that, the horse."
Right.
You say it enough times and it feels good to them. It might be kind of boring, but it feels good. And they want that affirmation. Well, you say the same thing to God. Like, "Oh, God, I'm praying again. Oh, sweetie, I'm happy. Thank you for praying to me. Oh, God, I'm doing my songs again. Oh, thank you. I'm so proud of you." It's an addiction. You get this
Yeah.
dopamine rush of like, my sky daddy loves me. He's happy with me.
Yeah.
I'm doing pretty good. And it is an addiction.
But
But
after a while, it stops mattering. Like
yeah,
if you're told you did a perfect job, like in heaven, we're going to do everything perfectly. So we're going to be told we did something perfect every time we do anything. And at some point we're going to stop. It's going to not matter. Like, of
yeah,
course I did perfect. I'm perfect at drawing. I'm in heaven. I draw perfect now. Like you all do too. Like none of us is special. We're
yeah,
all equal. It's like the line from The Incredibles. Like if everyone's special, nobody is.
yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
it just is. I say this tongue in cheek as a slight dig, but it's also a little bit ironic to me that heaven, meaning the new heavens and the new earth, and specifically the new Jerusalem, it is ironically Pythagorean. So like if you want to look at heaven, like really like look at the Red Book of Revelation, Pythagoras is all over that. And I think it's kind of weird that God would have to borrow from Pythagoras to make his heaven just so interesting to think about. But um, I, yeah, we could probably open that can of worms a little bit more, but I think we'll stop there. I wanted to kind of
Sure.
wrap up. I've kept you for a while, but
Oh, that's fine.
what haven't we touched on that you'd like to share about? And if I could ask you as well, I'll do my double question again. After
Mhm.
you do open mic, could you finish by telling us a little bit about Voices of Deconversion, your podcast? I'll have the links below our video, so you don't have to give the links. I'll have it there. Just people, when we're done here, everyone please click on those links and go like and subscribe and all that. But finish by telling us, what that's about. Before that, anything else that's on your heart?
Okay. I'm trying to think of like anything that we didn't touch on that's important. I think probably, I ask a similar question to people when they're on my podcast, and I just, oftentimes people answer with like, if you could tell somebody who's going through deconversion right now, what would you tell them? And often people say, that you're not alone, and it's repeated over and over again, but there's someone who just deconverted who needs to hear that. So you're not alone. To someone who's going through something like this, I think it's important to get that message out there that like there are so many of us now. And, every year I feel like there's more and more people, more and more podcasts, more and more shows, and more public figures who are saying that they're atheists or agnostic. So you're in good company. Like there's a lot of us out there, and I talked about some of the difficulties I went through in this process, but like you will get through it. Like I think what was huge for me was having discussions with other people who had gone through it, or even just having discussions with like atheists or agnostics and talking through some of these things. Like I think for me that really helped. And in fact, I didn't actually come out super publicly until 2017 when my podcast came out, because I had just told family. So like close family knew, but we never talked about it. So it was like like a very quiet, silent kind of thing. Like it was like a bad thing we didn't talk about with anyone. And so there were a few people that knew, but basically in 2017, when I launched the podcast, that's when I went on like Facebook, and just said like, hey, I started a podcast, and tried to be really positive about it, even though I knew like probably 80% of people would be like, what, he's an atheist, but no one said anything negative. It was really interesting. So
Lost 20% of your friends, but they didn't say anything.
yeah. Yeah, right. I don't think I lost any friends from that, but I don't think everyone's always reading everyone's Facebook pages, so people may not have seen it, but but that was when I first came out about it. And I think from that point on, and actually doing the podcast has helped me process it. And that's one of the reasons I started it. Was I knew that I had gone through hell, like so to speak, deconverting, and hearing stories and hearing people talk about it was so helpful for me that I knew that like, and there were podcasts I listened to that were doing this before me, but I knew I needed to be a part of that. I knew that I needed to be able to have those conversations, one, to help people, because I think when you go through something bad, if you're able to help other people who are going through a similar thing, it really helps you feel like your pain is actually, there's a purpose in your pain, in that it's going to help someone else and prevent them from going through maybe a little of the sorrow and the difficulty that you went through. Maybe you'll alleviate their pain a little bit. And that's been my experience, is that there are people that email me and tell me that, you know, it's really helped them process things. And that's like so fulfilling and so heartwarming. And it makes me feel like that's why I'm doing this. Like, it makes me so happy. It's really hard to like put words around it, but it's just so meaningful to know that other people who are struggling are being helped by basically my painful experience. Somehow that's helping alleviate their pain. And so that's been great. And then also it's helped me process, like I said, it's helped me process everything I went through and become more confident in my own skin. You know, you mentioned that earlier, like I think that since 2017, I've made huge strides in being able to be comfortable with who I am. And then getting out of a really crappy insurance job, insurance industry. It was crappy for me. You know, there's people that love their job, and I'm happy that they're happy. But for me, it wasn't happy, and I needed to get out of it. That has also helped. So finding something, I'm on my path kind of to get to be teacher someday. But like, I'm okay now. I'm not like really, really depressed and like bored out of my mind at work anymore, or stressed out of my mind, you know? So these are good things like that have happened. So I think I just want, I guess, other people to know, like, if they're going through deconversion or taking a similar path that I took, that like, these are the things that helped me. Talking to other people, trying to help others who are going through something like this has really been great. And that, like, amazingly, you'll look back on Christianity and you'll be okay with leaving it. Like, for a while, it's really heartbreaking, and you can't imagine your life without it, and you can't imagine who you are without it. But at some point, you do look back and you're like, it's okay. Like, I don't need it anymore, and I'm happy with my life. And you'll find the answers to the questions that are bothering you, and you'll find the explanations to the questions people ask you that right now stump you. You know, you'll get there. And so just be patient with yourself, and whatever your process is, just, you know, you'll be okay.
Yeah, that's a good
I'd probably
reminder.
say, yeah.
I love that. And yeah, for sure, for people that can eventually get involved in the conversation too. Not everyone can, whether because it's their situation with their family or their marriage or even the country they live in. But for those that do feel like they have an opening to speak up, definitely want to encourage that too, because we need a lot more people normalizing this. You know, the more normal it is, the more people will be like, oh yeah, I can actually, it's not that brave to ask these questions. I have the freedom to tell myself it's okay to think this doesn't sound right anymore. And I can take that wherever it leads me. Whether it, you know, leads you back into Christianity or leads you away from it, I'm at least free to say this doesn't sound right. I need these questions answered before I move forward. That's great, and I love that you're getting some good feedback. I expected a lot more negative feedback from mine. I expected just, you know, emails every day like, oh, you're leading people to hell. The emails that I get are like 99%. Thank you for this. This is great. I'm going through some hard stuff. This is awesome. I'm deconverting too. Thank you. You've had, you know, 1 or 2 interviews that just really hit exactly where I was working through, and it's helpful. It seems like a lot of people are hurting, and they need the freedom to know this is exactly where the conversation's at. The conversation is at getting out of mythology as a worldview, getting back to reality, and then hitting the refresh button and say, how do we then live? To borrow Francis Schaeffer, how do we then live as atheists? So it's good. I'm really glad to hear you're getting similar feedback.
It's really great. And like I think it's the same with me, is that I'm getting like 99% good. And I think I'm getting better with, like, when I get a negative email, like, it doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
You know, where you know, when you first start out, I think it's really kind of, you don't want to upset people, but then the more and more, you know, as time goes by, I just feel like just be who you are, say who you are, be authentic, and be yourself, and and let the chips fall where they may. And 99% of the time you're helping, these shows are not for Christians. These shows are not for the religious. I mean, sometimes we want to convince Christians, that's, we want them to hear what we're saying and like understand where we're coming from. But like, ultimately these shows are for us. These shows are for people who are open-minded and who are going through some like doubts, or who maybe just came through that, and like, so as long as we're making those people happy and we're helping those people, then I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love too the idea too that we're hopefully making a difference in what we didn't talk about this issue too much, but just the idea of childhood indoctrination. We're helping people to think through what happened to them, and this is a time to think through. You have a bit of Stockholm syndrome as a Christian. We all did, and we were in love with somebody that was really, really nasty, and we loved them through and through. And to think through the Stockholm syndrome, and then that on the positive side to say, how do I make a difference for the next generation? How do I raise children who are secular, who are focused on living their best life now, knowing it is their only life, and who can make a difference for this planet and for the next few generations? And just to take away some of that childhood indoctrination, which is abuse, to take it away, take it out of the equation for more and more people. What a cool gift to give to people. And I really do hope that our voices get bigger, not just ours, but just the atheist community, that we get bigger, and people really do start to realize that this is a tidal wave, this is a tsunami. Mythology, this is not Christianity as in we believe in God, we believe in Christ. The whole thing is mythology. And there's a reason that people don't really pray to Zeus. There's a reason there's not that many people go into the first church of Zeus anymore. And there's going to be a reason someday that people don't go to the first church of Jesus anymore. And it's going to die out. It's going to take longer than our lifetimes, but I love that, just to think that maybe hopefully I'm making a difference. So
well, and there's value in mythology too. So like when the people believing it's real is stripped away, then we can look at it from an objective standpoint and say, what's the good of it? Because this is humanity. Humanity has coped with our situation for millennia in this way. So why did we cope that way? What can we gain from it? What positive things can we learn from it? That's where I feel like the real gain comes. But right now we're still stuck in like, it's all true,
and even to address that, that's a point too, of like addressing it as a philosophy, because I mean a lot of Christianity is just Neoplatonism, just to say, all right, let's forget about the mythology, let's get to the philosophy part of it, the good stuff, and let's say, all right, this is a Neoplatonic book, through and through. What is Neoplatonism, and do I really want to embrace it as a worldview? Yes or no? And like then you can start to say, oh there's some good things about Neoplatonism, but there's some stuff that I'd rather take from this other pile here. And there's nothing. I mean, number one, the Bible is heavily syncretized from other sources. Like I said, over 100 quotes from the book of Enoch alone. But like all these sources it is coming from, but there's also other philosophies that are influencing it. And we can, anything that you found good, like if you turn the other cheek, forgive your brother, you can find that in other philosophies and other religions too. There's good stuff that we can find when we strip it down to the level of philosophy, as opposed to dogmatic theology. And it's true. There's some good stuff. There's some very good stuff. And it's funny, now that I'm not a Christian anymore, I am more fascinated by the Bible than I've ever been. Not because I think any of it's true, but because I'm curious, who did this? Like, who had the know-how to, and I know it was not one person, but like, who had the know-how to weave this Jesus story, which there may have been original Jesus, but they tell all these star stories through Mark. How do you weave astrotheology into a story like that? And with Luke and Acts weaving in Euripides and the Bacchae and the Iliad and the Odyssey, how do you do that? Weave in Pythagoras over and over, gematria. How do you weave in all these numerical codes? So they were the bread and butter for Jews back then. Early Kabbalah. How do you do that and do it in a way that to the hoi polloi it just looks like a story? And unless you know the other stuff, you're like, I don't see any of that. I just see a Jesus story. Like there's some serious smarts going on behind the scenes. It's not smarts as in this is a divine book, but it's pretty cool. And there's some snippets there that like, oh wow, I can see what you did there.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I think it's fun to look at it that way.
Yeah. Well, wrap this up. What's any final thoughts you have, and if you could just tell us a word or two about the Voices of Deconversion.
Yep. So I'll just go. Yeah, I've given I think my final thoughts, but yeah, my the podcast is basically was started about 4 years ago, and it was, like I mentioned, to help other people going through what I went through. I felt like telling the stories, hearing the stories of people, letting them tell their story of what they went through was one of the most powerful and helpful things that I could do, providing that platform to people to be able to do that, to be able to help others. So just letting people tell their stories, it helps them. It's really, great for me. Like I get really inspired by it. And then other people going through it will get helped by it. So I started it for that reason. I also wanted to share stories and not have like on my podcast, I may someday like do topic-based stuff too, but like instead of doing that, and I didn't want to have like a debate podcast. Those podcasts are really helpful and great for a lot of reasons, but I found that someone just sharing their experience was to me the most powerful thing. And debates don't tend to convince people in general, or they might, but
It's true.
this is just my preference, of course. I have nothing against them, and I love watching debates and still, sometimes enjoy that. But anyway, my podcast is just sharing these stories so that, people like us who are going through difficult times will be able to, feel better, and it will help them. So that's basically what the podcast is for.
Do you have a round number of about how many interviews you've already done?
Yeah, it's about 74, 75.
Wow.
Yeah, my last episode was episode 75, but some of those episodes were like part 1, part 2, and
Yeah.
My last episode was just me reading something, which is not typical, but I was like, I've been not finding as much time for the podcast in the last few months because of leaving my old job. But I'm hoping to kind of start ramping up again, and I'm going to try to maybe have an episode maybe once a month for a while. And see how that goes. So, but yeah.
Well, I've listened to a few of them, probably about 3 or 4 of them, and they're fantastic. If I can just do a plug for Steve,
Sure.
everyone, please do go to his podcast. You can see it on YouTube. Listen to it, I guess I should say, but see it through YouTube. You can listen to it through the other sources that I've got links for below. But please definitely go there. We haven't done enough justice. We've focused more on our stories today, but the work that you do through the podcast, Voices of Deconversion, it is amazing. People have shared some painful stuff, some amazing stuff, some stories of transformation, where they, pardon the pun, but they've seen the light, the scales have fallen from their eyes, and they've turned from darkness to light. And some good things have happened. It sounds like some really cool experiences have been shared on your podcast. And that's what people need to hear, that there is hope. That it feels like, this is darkness. My life is not dark because we're not in truth anymore. We're now finally out of darkness into the truth, but it feels dark because people are against us, and it's like, oh, this is kind of depressing. And it's like, you don't want that to be the outcome. You want people to feel like the healthiness is going to expand out. But you've told some stories where people do go through some hard times, and then they realize how to, ground themselves, how to heal from the trauma, and how to become whole again, and take away the toxicity. And that's just, we all need that kind of stuff. We need those kind of messages daily, in my opinion.
Yeah, people are finding their voice. We kind of alluded to this idea, but we're finding out who we are. We're finding out what we are as a person. We're finding out how to talk about ourselves and how to talk about our experiences, and we're becoming more comfortable with who we are as people. And I think that's a great thing. So
yeah, I look forward to seeing who you have coming up in the next few weeks and months for your next few podcasts. Hopefully you stay more up to date on yours than I do. I've I've tried hard, but I'm a few weeks behind, or a few months behind at this point. Posting videos, but it's a lot of work, but I think it's worth it, and I look forward to seeing who you end up chatting with next. But Steve, thank you so much, everyone. Steve Hilliker, thank you so much for sharing your story and your podcast. It's been awesome. I love hearing stories like yours, and hope as I said before, I hope your voice and your platform gets bigger and bigger in all this.
Yeah, well, thanks again, Tim, for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about like my podcast and my story, and just chat with you. It was really fun. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Let's connect again sometime. I'd love to follow up with you in a few months and see how things are going.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
All right. Bye.